Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps and steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, the GSA yields. Biden's transition becomes official. Meanwhile, a thoroughly defeated Donald Trump still insists he has a chance. Not dead yet. Sorry. As COVID surges, so does holiday travel, sadly. And Janet Yellen, your new Treasury Secretary, John Kerry, your first climate czar. Dianne Feinstein to step down from the Judiciary Committee leadership. Biden filling out at least part of his cabinet at this point with establishment picks. David Dinkins, New York City's first and only black mayor, rest in peace at age 93. Meanwhile, in New York State, Democrats secure veto-proof majority in its legislature. This is going to have big implications for progressive legislation that hopefully will be modeled in New York. The Fifth Circuit rules that Texas and Louisiana, however, can cut off Medicaid funding for abortion. Trump continues to burrow extremists into our government civil service. And the leader of the Breonna Taylor protest shot and killed. No details yet. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. Join me today, as most days, is Emma Vigeland. Hello, Emma. How are you?
I'm good, Sam. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm getting excited about the Thanksgiving break, as it were. Take a couple of days off first since the essentially Labor Day, I guess. We have obviously had an election, and it is nice that it's finally wrapped up for all intents and purposes. I mean, Donald Trump is still on his
There's still
tour.
a chance. There's still a chance.
I may be dating myself, but in the Monty Python's Holy Grail, I keep thinking of that of the knight who has no arms and no legs, and he's still.
I'll bite you to death. Is that
exactly? Yes,
yeah,
that
we
one.
Go.
Well,
See?
I guess there you go.
Not that dated.
That's not apparently not. But he's still claiming he sort of like did I didn't really lose, but we're going to go forward with the transition, and that is going to be hugely important for a number of reasons. Obviously, national security. You want there to be some continuity. There's only so much that can happen domestically because you need. We won't know really in terms of what can genuinely happen domestically. Until we find out what happens in Georgia in many respects. However, what can happen, at least in terms of like what the executive branch can do, is to begin to construct logistics for the distribution of vaccines, which will come online in some of the instances, very possibly by the end of December. And of course, not huge amounts, but amounts that we're going to go, I would imagine, directly to
frontline workers, high-risk individuals. Yeah, I mean, I think I heard on the news that they're going to start distributing the vaccine for frontline workers and other essential workers in New Jersey by, I think, a little over 100,000 by the end of December.
That is
mid to late December, which is extremely significant.
Yes. And as there's a lot of obviously logistics involved in just getting them to frontline workers. In some respects, it may be even more difficult because you're trying to target specific people. Now, I would imagine what's going to happen is the states are going to be heavily involved in that. But as you start to talk about how you're going to get these vaccines widely distributed, how you're going to pay for it, how
you going to pay for it, huh?
Who's going to pay for it and
Right.
and whatnot. But the logistics are the big deal here, and apparently, that is what you're going to see a tremendous amount of work on that front, obviously, because the sooner the vaccines can be distributed and of course manufactured as well. The U.S. government has already provided a significant amount of money to these companies for the production of these vaccines. In fact, I believe the production's probably already going on now. And part of that was the idea being, we can waste some money if these vaccines turn out to be not so great. But we will talk more about that as the weeks go on when we return from Thanksgiving. But for those of you who are still sort of debating what you're going to be doing for Thanksgiving, I'm not in a position to tell people, what they should do, I guess. I guess to a certain extent, I can tell you what my opinion is, which is you should not have a big Thanksgiving festival. You should not travel great distances because those great distances mean that you will be exposed or potentially exposed to other people who you do not know, who are not necessarily, in your potted social circle. In the Northeast, I think this part of the country more or less is doing better than the rest, primarily because of the experience we had at the beginning of this pandemic, at least in this country, and the devastation it wrought. But here is, and one of the things that's difficult about this is that, occasionally you'll read here and there someone's personal experience. Occasionally here or there, you'll see a video of a nurse or a doctor talking about their experiences in hospitals that are now overrun. We're getting reports in rural areas around the country that they're having to send patients to the cities because, there's just not the capacity to handle the number of patients that they have.
Right. And this was warned about months and months ago when New York City was hit the hardest at the start of the pandemic, that eventually it would spread to rural areas and they would not have the capacity to deal with the amount of patients and with the necessary resources to help them. And we're seeing that in droves right now.
It's interesting because, at the time we were like, you heard a lot of people talk about flatten the curve, right? And I guess maybe to some extent people became weary of that. But it is because, they're talking about flattening the curve in early April and in March for New York, but the rest of the country didn't necessarily, or at least a vast majority of the country wasn't experiencing anything like that. But you get the sense that they got weary with the idea of flatten the curve. And the idea, again, about flatten the curve is that you do not want a spike of patients because your hospital only has so much ability to deal with so many patients. There is not a lot of slack in the U.S. healthcare system at all because it's vastly about making profits and having extra capacity in the event that there's a pandemic or some type of emergency just simply is not
overhead.
Right. Exactly. It's just simply not profitable. And that is one of the problems with having a for-profit system, is that it doesn't make allowances for events such as these, and why you need a healthier and more robust system of public hospitals in this country, where the idea is you get high quality care, but it is not about making a profit. And so we have this problem. The curve is not flattening in many of these places. You're starting to see some places a little bit, but remember, when we talk about hospitalizations, we're still about 2 weeks away from the numbers that we see today. And Monday is traditionally, we have Monday's numbers. Mondays are traditionally lower, but today's, or I should say on November 23rd, it was 179,000 infected, which is a 50% 14-day change. The deaths are now up 62%. It was over 1,000. That was on yesterday. Remember, Mondays also tend to be days where it's underreported. Hospitalized at 85,000. That's up 50%. I would imagine today's numbers, and I don't know if they've come out yet, will be higher, significantly higher. And
as you mentioned, the 14-day lag for deaths, we're going to see a significant death increase 14 days from now, even 10 days from now, from when we were seeing last week those record highs, breaking records in cases, et cetera, over and over again.
When you see the hospitalizations, it's somewhere between 16, or I should say the infections, it's somewhere between 16 and 21 days is generally when you start to see the deaths come in. And it can range between 1.4 and 1.8 in terms of a death rate. And so we're not going to see the peak of this stuff for a couple of weeks. And that is presuming that we will not see a new peak because of Thanksgiving. And then that will roll into Christmas. And who knows, hopefully people will have a clearer understanding of what's going on. Like, I wonder if there isn't more travel now because people presume that by Christmas they're not going to be able to travel, but that just exacerbates things too. I mean, I'm watching images of people in airports, crowded airport waiting areas. And it's just, it's going to be a problem. And one of the things that is difficult, like I was about to say, is because of HIPAA rules, and I'm all in favor of HIPAA rules in terms of confidentiality with people and protected people's privacy when they're sick. We don't have cameras strolling through wards in hospitals. We can't do that. We shouldn't do that. But a lot of times, part of the problem with our modern era is that we don't believe things are real unless we see them on video.
Well, we had that New York Times report earlier in the pandemic from New York where that nurse took a hidden camera in, and that was jarring because of exactly what you're saying. We don't see these kinds of images.
We don't see them. And here is a doctor from Minnesota. This was on CNN, discussing how their healthcare system and the upper Midwest has been hit particularly hard. How their healthcare system is on the verge of just simply breaking.
I think for us as healthcare workers, when we see the numbers of the thousands of people in Minnesota that are getting tested positive every day, it's terrifying, because we can find physical space. We can make rooms. We have made rooms. We can get ventilators. We can get equipment, but we can't create doctors. We can't create nurses to take care of patients. We can't create respiratory therapists to manage the ventilators. And when thousands of people are getting sick, that just means there's more risk for a healthcare worker to get sick, for a healthcare worker to be exposed and then be quarantined. And I think we're all just really, really scared of what's to come because the hospitals are already full.
And understand, I would imagine in places like New York City, you're going to see less cases of the flu than you typically do, because people are washing their hands, they're wearing masks out in public, they're at least, to some extent mitigating their exposure to the flu virus, because they're also trying to mitigate their exposure to coronavirus. Around the country, in these places where we're seeing the coronavirus surging, there's no reason to believe that they're going to have a diminished amount of flu cases. And this is part of the problem that people didn't seem to be able to wrap their heads around, or I shouldn't say all people. Some people could not seem to wrap their heads around at the beginning of this, which is we have a certain amount of capacity, slack in the system to deal with the annual flu, but we don't have any more slack after that. And so we're going to see these hospitals are overrun with a coronavirus now. It could get worse within weeks, but we will also start to see them having to deal with flu patients.
And potentially combination infections, which is
indeed
a whole new terrain that we're going to be dealing with in the final months of 2020 and into next year.
So folks should just be aware of the situation that that you could potentially be exposing yourself and others to. And Thanksgiving this year is just going to be different. And I don't know, you want to say it's going to stink a little bit? No, I mean,
yeah, I mean, like the
conservatives
raising hell about this and talking about how leftists hate Thanksgiving, we hate Christmas too, right? I mean, how snowflakey are you that you can't just take 1 year off from your traditional feasts and the way you celebrate just for the public good? I know that's a foreign concept, but like they're clinging to these kinds of traditions as if it's life or death, basically. But it is life or death for some
exactly.
people.
And right. It's not just for the public good. It's for the good of, because look,
your grandma, your uncle,
exactly.
your cousin.
Exactly. All the people.
Well, I also thought like the prevalence of people knowing healthcare workers, I thought would have a greater effect, frankly. Like I have I know somebody in North Dakota who's had to pick up 4 night shifts because literally like, all the nurses are quarantining with COVID. And like Burgum, the governor of North Dakota, had to issue this crazy announcement a few weeks ago that really upset a lot of the hospitals, because he said, actually, you know what? Some places are letting COVID positive nurses treat COVID patients. Like that's the state of things. They brought in a whole bunch of military nurses now. But this is all really Sturgis, right? South Dakota, yep. Nome in Sturgis. She's literally doing $1 million in advertising for tourism at this time.
Yeah,
I'm getting the advertisements
saying, I'm not scared of COVID, whatever. Tough lady
psycho.
She is. Yeah.
It's nuts. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more as we shift from warning you about travel on Thanksgiving to giving you something to celebrate if you're staying home. And we'll be right back in just a moment with that. In the meantime, this is going to surprise you, Emma. When would you say the perfect time to plant like a tree or a shrub would be?
If I were to guess, I'd say April.
So spring. Yes. Wrong. Shocking. I got to say, I was surprised by this too, because I've always done it in the early spring until this year when I read, coincidentally, that it's fall.
Wow.
You got to get it in the ground where the ground's still soft and there's a little bit of time for the roots to establish, but that way they just get like a surge of energy in the spring. That's my understanding. Anyways, if you go to a big box store and you ask them when's the best time to plant a tree, they're just going to look at you and go like, I don't know. But like I say, it is the fall. And when you go to plant your tree, we're in zone 5 up here. And I think you could still get a tree into the ground. The best place to go, and I've actually been buying trees there before these guys became a sponsor, just coincidentally enough, fastgrowingtrees.com. It is the world's largest online nursery. And the thing that's amazing about, well, first of all, I've been ordering trees through the mail for 15 years, frankly. And they show up. It's so much easier. They come intact. And at one point, I was getting bare roots, which is a disaster. You want a tree that is already established. And that's the amazing thing about fast-growing trees. They don't grow. I think the dirty secret is they don't grow faster. It's just that they're bigger when they send them to you.
Right. So you don't have to wait for them to sprout up.
You don't
That's
have
so
to wait.
tedious.
And they are not as fragile, or not
Right.
fragile. They're just not as like tentative. So the best way to grow a tree in the fall is to go over to fastgrowingtrees.com. They have a 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, which means your plants are going to arrive happy, healthy, and ready for planting. Now through December 15th, go to fastgrowingtrees.com/majority for 10% off. That's 10% off fastgrowingtrees.com/majority, fastgrowingtrees.com/majority. My suggestion to you, if you're looking for an apple tree, go with the Arkansas Black. I know everybody's like, oh,
He's the expert, guys.
I want the Honey
Him.
Crisp. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's all well and good. But the Arkansas Black is an apple you can keep through for months. And if you're looking for something that's like, and it's also got a very tough skin, so it's you don't have to spray it or anything like that. I would go with the Arkansas Black. And if you're looking for a nice ornamental tree, I would go with the it is the lilac. What is it called? Bloomerang. It blooms twice. A lilac tree that blooms twice. It's gorgeous.
Because it comes back around.
Bingo.
Wow.
There you go. Yeah. Also, during the pandemic, I discovered literati. And if you want your kids to feel, some of the fun and laughter that they've lacked in 2020, there's nothing like a subscription book club that sends children's books to your door each month, handpicked by experts, 5 of them. Literati Kids has book clubs for children's ages 0 to 12, and each club has age-appropriate selections tailored to what your child needs. Not only do you get these awesome books, they send like little posters and stickers and like little, different types of goodies, like drawing stuff.
That's
you
fun.
can get. Yes, no, it's been great. Gift subscriptions are available for 1, 3, 6, or 12 months of books. So if you don't know what to get your nephew or your niece or your grandkids, or frankly, your kids, or frankly, you know what? It's like, it's really sort of also a gift for the parents, to be honest with you, because it's hard to, there's like, I can get like 3 or 4 books deep into like when I ask suggestions from people, but then all of a sudden people run out of books to suggest. And the great thing about Literati is that they send you these books, and you get a sense of what your kid likes to read, because they don't know. It's really just, you put it in front of them. It's almost like they're like animals, like they're cats or dogs. And it's just like, you can't guess what kind of food they're going to eat. You put a couple in front of them, you see which one they go to. And that's what I've found is the best thing about this. Plus, you get super excited to get a package. You can go to literati.com/majority for 25% off your first 2 orders. Pick your kids' book club gift today. Remember, no one else has kids' book clubs like these. Only at Literati. It is literati.com/majority. You get 25% off your first 2 orders. Receive 5 incredible kids' books curated by experts, delivered to your door every month. That's literati.com/majority. Make your little one's holiday season unforgettable this year. So check it out. Also, don't forget, this program relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, we have merch. People can check this out at shop.majorityreportradio.com. So, Emma, I know you're looking to get your parents all sorts of gifts. We've got
you can get coffee mugs like the one I'm drinking out of right now.
You can get coffee mugs. You can get carpenter pencils and hoodies and hats and shirts. So check that out. Folks will enjoy it. And you can also gift, if you go to jointhemajorityreport.com, you can also gift a membership if you're interested. All right. So let's dig into what is, the idea of like, well, listen, I don't think there's any reason not to, frankly, to celebrate, at least briefly, before we get to work, because I don't want people to go to sleep.
Right.
There's a lot of things from a progressive standpoint. And, frankly, just broadly speaking, one of the problems we have in this country, to my mind, is that we have people who get completely reffed up and invested in an election. If the Democrat wins, they go to sleep 3 or 4 years or 2 years, and they wake up and they go, hey, what happened? Folks need to engage in this stuff. But before we do, let's enjoy ourselves.
Let's dance on Trump's grave.
Exactly. And rhetorically, of course. It's going to be, we got to find out who knows what could happen in the future. I'm not excluding any dancing happening, but I'm just saying right now, he's not actually dead. It's just his presidency is. And here is Laura Ingraham. And this is sort of fascinating to watch the pivots here, right?
Right.
Because they are telling their audience, after giving them all of this sort of like false hope and creating this narrative that, well, it's actually over. And just remember, I never gave you any false hope.
Yeah.
Here's Laura Ingraham delivering that message. Like, I'm hoping that you didn't DVR any of my shows from like 3 weeks ago.
Actually, I was right all along, and your dreams are dashed. Bye.
Bye.
What's next? That's the focus of tonight's angle. In what was perhaps the most consequential tweet sent since Election Day, President Trump gave the go-ahead for the transition. You see it there. And as unpleasant and disappointing as these past 3 weeks have been to so many of us, as much as we wish things were different, this is where things stand tonight. Now, legal challenges continue in a number of states. Serious questions about vote counting, poll watcher access are outstanding. But unless the legal situation changes in a dramatic and, frankly, an unlikely manner, Joe Biden will be inaugurated on January 20th. Now, to say this does not mean I don't think that this election was rife with problems and potential fraud. And to say this does not constitute being a sellout to the conservative populist movement that I've been fighting for 25 years.
And
it does not.
Hold on. Yeah. One, I want to make sure you don't call me a sellout. So I'm going to say I'm not a sellout, which completely means that you can't say it, doesn't count. No. I'm not a sellout, even though all the Trump supporters are going to say stuff about Fox News. Go to OANN for a little bit, then come back.
We will get to that in a moment. But yes, it is an age-old strategy. You build the critique into the presentation. And here she is making it clear and using these sort of like weasel words like potential for fraud. Well, let's be honest. There's always potential for fraud. Although we have had really the instances of fraud in this country on elections have been, you could go back into the 60s. You could talk about, sort of like what happened in Chicago and over the years, I'm sure there has been fraud, but on a national level, very difficult to establish that there has been a widespread fraud. I think there is, an argument about electronic voting, at least in terms of it being obscured, but the idea of potential fraud, you're 3 weeks into it. You've supposedly deployed all the investigations. If you didn't find fraud, maybe there's no fraud, but let's continue.
Conservative populist movement that I've been fighting for 25 years. And it does not mean that I disagree at all with the president's right and obligation to pursue all legitimate legal challenges to this outcome. To say this constitutes living in reality. And if I offered you a false reality, if I told you that there was an excellent, phenomenal chance that the Supreme Court was going to step in and deliver a victory to President Trump, I'd be lying to you. Now, you've known me for a long time now, and you know me long enough to know that I will not lie to you or simply tell you what you want to hear. But what I will tell you tonight is that even amidst an election loss, there is an enormous amount for us to be hopeful about, even optimistic. And how things are handled going forward is going to have a huge impact on the Republicans' ability to stop Biden's most egregious moves and thus These next moves are critical to the future of the country. And thanks to President Trump, we have seen the amazing results that are possible with his America First agenda. Middle income, blue-collar workers saw unprecedented wage gains. The Middle East, historic peace deals nobody thought was possible.
What?
Of course, we saw China finally put back on.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
she going
come
on?
on,
Yeah.
come on. Yeah.
She pivoted quite quickly. Now, how many seconds, Brendan, was it before they started calling her a sellout on Parler?
I don't know. I'm not checking Parler.
I imagine it's happened quite quickly, right?
Well,
I mean,
right, but she's the representative of the conservative populist movement, as she has been for 25 years, you know.
the moment she got out of Dartmouth.
Right,
Her and Dinesh,
right.
yeah.
Her, Dinesh, Ted Cruz, you know, all these duck hunting, Steve Bannon hanging out with, complete, whiskey shotgunning conservative populists. That's what I think of.
And there it is. Laura Ingraham does the big pivot. She lets them down easy and tells them, don't worry, it's been a success. And hopefully she'll be able to come back on her show tonight and just pretend like none of that ever happened and just sort of ease right into calling Joe Biden a communist and talk about, the
China.
problems. Yes, of course. And
there's going to be so much China talk, and I can't imagine that outside of their specific bubble, it's going to have much weight. Like, as we're in an economic depression and hundreds of thousands of Americans are going to die of coronavirus, do you think anyone's really that obsessed over China outside people already voting for Republicans?
No.
We'll see.
And what's going to be interesting to me is how are they going to deal with the coronavirus, right? Like, because they've already set up this premise that, and I imagine their viewers have forgotten it, that it was going to go away the day after the election, because of course it was, completely fraudulent. But at the same time, it's quite possible that by early and late spring, we're going to have vaccinations that are basically going to begin the process of people being able to live their life normally without concern about catching things, where people are going to be able to go visit their folks in nursing homes, but where you're going to be able to, maybe they'll require you to have a vaccine if you go send your kids to like a daycare or whatever it is. And the question is like, how much are they going to pivot to this is the Trump vaccine, which they'll probably call it, but also just the fact that that things could be getting better at that point. Like, it's going to be interesting to see how they
might say, like, as it gets better, well, it could have been this way all along if it weren't for the Democratic hand wringing, like, of course, now things are getting better now that the Democrats in charge, and they want you to think that everything's hunky dory.
Or I wonder if some of them aren't going to go to like full on, no vax, anti-vaxxing. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if they get away with that on Fox. I imagine we'd hear more of that from OWN. So there's Laura Ingraham's pivot. Here is Tucker Carlson's pivot, which is really no pivot at all. Although it is a pivot, you'll recall that just days ago, he was attacking Sidney Powell,
who's not a Trump attorney, by the way.
Who apparently
just stumbled onto the stage and spoke for the Trump team alongside Rudy Giuliani on multiple occasions, but not on the Trump team.
Not on the Trump team. And he had, and it's curious, the catalyst for her being jettisoned, or was aware that she was about to be jettisoned and was sort of, loosening the soil, as it were. But he was saying, like, she won't come on the show with evidence, so we're not going to let her on. Like, you can't just come on and make assertions about how the software was rigged without evidence. That is absolutely unacceptable at all for anybody to come on the Tucker Carlson and make those assertions without evidence. Only Tucker can do that.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. You've heard a lot over the past few days about the security of our electronic voting machines. And this is a real issue, no matter who raises it or who tries to dismiss it out of hand as a conspiracy theory. Electronic voting is not as secure as traditional hand counting, period. It never will be as secure. Voters can see this because it's obvious and it makes them nervous. And why wouldn't it make them nervous? Our leaders have given us every reason not to trust technology. The people now telling us to stop asking questions about voting machines are the same ones who claimed that our phones weren't listening to us. They lie. We all know that.
Pause it for 1 second. Pause
Other
it.
countries
Pause it.
understand it.
Who are these people? Who are these people who are saying don't ask questions about electronic vote? Who are these people?
There's literally, none.
And they were telling you that the phones weren't listening to, like, there is some shadowy cabal that he doesn't define that is doing this stuff. And it's a they or them and these people. Like, I don't know who these people are. And I think that's part of the point.
Likely the globalists. I mean, the left is the Democrats are the party that want to implement paper ballots, not on a national level, but the only real initiatives that I've seen on state levels have come from the Democratic Party. So another false premise that he's just setting up so he can knock down that straw man.
Let's hear more.
Machines are the same ones who claimed that our phones weren't listening to us. They lie. We all know that. Other countries understand it. They don't use electronic voting because they know it undermines confidence in democracy. A system cannot function if no one trusts the vote. And that's true here, too, as we're finding out. Going forward, we need to find out exactly what happened in this month's presidential election. We need to find out no matter how long it takes the investigation to unfold or how much it costs. And once we get answers from that investigation, we ought to revert immediately to...
Pause it. What investigation? Is there an investigation going on? Is Rudy Giuliani doing an investigation? Is that what's happening? Or is Sidney Powell doing this? Like, who's doing an investigation?
I guess the Tucker Carlson program, but not with the evidence provided by Sidney Powell. Because it turns out he wasn't opposed to the Trump administration pushing forward these conspiracy theories about fake votes and election fraud. He's fine to do it himself. He was just mad that Sidney Powell didn't come on his show. So that's the ego of Tucker Carlson. And like so many silly people got duped into giving him credit for that segment like 2 nights ago.
Of course. But as far as I know, there's no investigation now. I suppose the Mitch McConnell's in charge, has control of the Senate. He could launch an investigation right now and I would love to see some type of legislation that comes out of this that standardizes voting across the country, that makes voting a right. You don't have a right to vote, at least a federal right to vote. And therefore it becomes very difficult to do things like standardize it and protect it because it is not a right. Let's continue.
The investigation to unfold or how much it costs. And once we get answers from that investigation, we ought to revert immediately to the traditional system of voting, the one that served our democracy for hundreds of years. What we're doing now is not working. That's an understatement. As of tonight, the state of New York still hasn't managed to count the votes in 5 House races thanks to mail-in voting. That's a disaster. Let's stop pretending that it's not. But at the same time, we shouldn't let our focus on voting machines.
Why is it a disaster? I mean, it would be nice if they counted them as they came in and we had standardized mail-in voting, because we don't see these problems in states that have switched over to all mail-in ballots. But why is it a disaster? We don't know who these Congress people are. They haven't seated yet. I mean, we waited until I think it was June in 2008 to seat Al Franken as a senator from Minnesota. I don't recall anybody on the right saying this is a disaster that we're waiting on this race between Norm Coleman and Al Franken. It's weird. It's just, we're supposed to take that it's just a disaster.
Right. And didn't Tucker Carlson and the entire Fox News apparatus or the opinion section bemoan the fact that the election was called on the Friday after the election? So if it's such a disaster that they're still waiting to, certify the results, like, shouldn't you be on the side of the news media that decided to make a decisive action and say Joe Biden won the election? But no, it's a disaster that they're still counting votes.
It's a disaster. Continue.
Thanks to mail-in voting. That's a disaster. Let's stop pretending that it's not. But at the same time, we shouldn't let our focus on voting machines distract us from all that happened earlier this month. The 2020 presidential election was not fair. No honest person would claim that it was fair.
I'm honest.
On many levels, the system was rigged against one candidate and in favor of another.
What?
And it was rigged in ways that were not hidden from view. We all saw it happen. The media openly colluded with the Democratic nominees.
Openly colluded.
Joe Biden and Kamala Harris refused to explain what they would do if they were elected. That's never happened before in any presidential election in American history.
Oh, my God.
But the media allowed them to do it. At the same time, beginning in the spring, Democrats used our public health emergency for nakedly partisan ends. They punished Trump supporters for trying to gather, but they exempted their own activists, rioters and vandals from BLM and Antifa, from the COVID lockdowns entirely.
Okay, pause it. I'm sorry. So he transitions from saying that it was rigged in favor. The election was unfair and rigged in favor of the Democrats. His reasoning. Black Lives Matter protests and Antifa. How does that relate to vote totals? How does that relate to the way that Americans' votes were tabulated? I don't know. I mean, he was trying to claim that it was unfair because the media was more on Biden and Kamala Harris's side. Whoop-de-doo. That has nothing to do with how votes are totaled. I mean, like the way he just seamlessly
to be honest,
from those baseless claims is unbelievable.
We have never, ever fully vetted Joe Biden's relationship with Reverend Wright or with the Weather Underground. Right?
Yeah, I mean, we need to hear more about Hunter Biden's laptop.
What's going on with Bill Ayers? We never fully vetted Barack Obama and Bill Ayers, and so we have never really fully vetted Joe Biden
or his Barack plagiarism. Obama. Remember that from the 80s? I don't know.
That never came up. Let's hear again from Tucker Carlson. Let him finish this out.
Vandals from BLM and Antifa from the COVID lockdowns entirely. They said this out loud. The restrictions they did enforce crushed America's small businesses, the heart of the Republican Party. And yet they made their own donors fantastically richer. Jeff Bezos alone saw his net worth jump by more than $70 billion during the pandemic. Then Democrats used the coronavirus to change their system of voting. They vastly increased the number of mail-in ballots because they knew their candidates would benefit from less secure voting. And they were right. God. They used the courts to neutralize the Republican Party's single most effective get-out-the-vote operation, which for generations had been the National Rifle Association. Not enough has been written about this, but anyone on the ground saw it. Thanks to legal harassment from the left, the NRA played a vastly reduced role in this election, and that made a huge difference in swing states like Pennsylvania and others. But above all, Democrats harnessed the power of big tech to win this election. Virtually all news and all information in the English-speaking world travels through a single company, Google. A huge percentage of our political debates take place on Facebook and Twitter. If you use technology to censor the ideas that people are allowed to express online, ultimately you control how the population votes. And that's exactly what they did. They rigged.
Well, except that that's just not based in any reality, because if you look at empirical studies of data that's shared online and Facebook and things like that, it leans so far right, it's just completely disconnected. Like, he's just
Are you suggesting that Dan Bongino shouldn't be the top shared source of news on Facebook in like 12 out of 20 slots 3 weeks in a row?
Is consistently one of the top most shared Facebook. Like, he's just taking these niche issues that he cares about and thinks pushes some specific buttons and then pretends like that's what influenced the election. Like, this isn't just a laundry list of things that piss you off, Tucker. We have to base these things in reality about what translates to vote totals.
Well, I think they're also larger than just Tucker Carlson. I mean, I think these are the themes that the Republicans are pushing and have been pushing for quite a while. I mean, one of the interesting things I think it was Ryan Grimm tweeted out that on Twitter, Senator Mike Lee from Utah is, talking about freedom and, occasionally saying democracy is bad and whatnot. But more or less, sort of libertarian views that he's putting out there that aren't necessarily directly related to the news of the day. On Parler, however, where he's talking solely to conservatives, he's basically saying that the election has been stolen. Right. And so the idea that first off, the only things that were censored were like demonstrably untrue things, false, fictionalized fake news, which Donald Trump has been complaining about for years. But this is going to be the cri de coeur, as it were, of conservatives for the years coming by. It's going to be, and there is an opportunity for people to address these problems. I mean, one of the things that, and we're going to get to, we'll take a moment here and take a break in just a sec. But there's going to be a push to roll back Section 230 of the Digital Millennium Act, which protects places like YouTube and Facebook and basically online technology companies that from liability for what other people post as opposed to what they post, because they suggest that they're not publishers. There's another way to deal with this problem rather than getting in there and deciding who can and cannot censor and what liability people have and, what liability companies that set up platforms have for the people who put the content in there. And that is make them smaller, make them have competitors.
Break them
people
up.
Want to go to Parler and people go to Twitter, and there's not one that becomes like, an essential utility.
I have a Parler note, by the way. Some breaking news from William Legate, who tried to post the hashtag "Write in Trump for GA" on Parler, and Parler is censoring that hashtag.
What?
So,
whoa.
Seems kind of like partisan brainwashing to me, but.
Seems like some
Parler
big tech.
Makes a big issue of that. And I've heard Roger Stone is threatening to revive his PAC to have a similar act in Georgia. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of the Biden appointments to his cabinet. Right back. We're back. Quickly, just on the non-national security front, Janet Yellen was announced as Biden's pick for Treasury Secretary. She was a former chair of the Federal Reserve Bank. She was also the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. She was an economic advisor to Bill Clinton. When she was just a member of the Fed, she was a bit of a dove, which is a good thing as far as I'm concerned, where the idea being that we're not too worried about inflation and we can increase employment. And at one point, there was a broader understanding that 5% was not the smallest amount of unemployment that you can sustain without having runaway inflation.
Right.
A lot of precepts of monetary policy have been, I wouldn't say shattered, but are like cracking and crumbling. When she became Fed chair, she was a little bit more hawkish, as it were. And people discredit.
She'd made pro-austerity comments in the past that I think people are pointing to now, but more recently she'd walked that back and discussed how currently, based on our economic climate and in recent years, that she's much less concerned about inflation and deficit.
Yes.
Than she had been in the past.
In 2015, she raised rates a little bit, which contracted the economy or at least slowed it. And some people suggest that maybe Hillary Clinton would have won had that tightening not happened. but it does feel like she is has on some level, a lot of these people feel like Joe Biden, which is they have deep establishment roots. They have conventional wisdom thinking that has gone unchanged up until really the past 4 or 5 years. And they are not hostile to arguments from the left. That's like, if I was so far with all the picks, I would say that is sort of the broad stroke version of that. But there are problems with some of those folks. Also, just add, John Kerry named the climate czar. He's the one who got us in the Paris Accords. You'll recall he also will be sitting on the National Security Council, which
it's a new position, which is excellent.
It shows that there's a level of seriousness about climate change. I suspect that if Joe Biden has the ability to pass things through the Senate, that a climate bill will be one of the first things that they expend a lot of their political capital on. On the national security front, Emma, tell us what you can.
Yeah.
To the extent that we know about, Department of Homeland Security Secretary and Secretary of State at this point. Tell us a little bit about those people. And then, of course, we also have DNI. So,
yeah. So, I mean, let's start there with Avril Haines, the pick for DNI, Director of National Intelligence, because I think that's probably the most problematic of all of the Biden picks thus far. I mean, Larry Summers could have been the Treasury Secretary, so I'm fairly happy with Yellen in terms of just the scope of who Biden was going to pick. But Avril Haines, I think, of those announced thus far, is the most problematic based on her direct involvement with Obama's drone war program. I read the Washington Post article on it, which just discussed how later in Obama's presidency, she was involved in creating some sort of stopgap or some program in order to limit civilian casualties. The Post conveniently left out the fact that she was heavily involved in creating and establishing many of those civilian casualties in the programs that led up to that during her time at the CIA. And also, she helped shield the CIA officers who were caught basically spying on the Senate Intelligence, or I think it was the Senate Intelligence Committee, or the Senate investigation into CIA torture. She backed them, and she vouched for their illegal interference in the Senate investigation into themselves. So she is being talked about in the media as the first woman in this position. The reality is that she's close with Gina Haspel. She's been a part of national security establishment for a long time, and not in good ways. She was supportive of and pushed Obama to intervene in Libya. We're seeing this also with Tony Blinken. Biden was not in favor of intervening in Libya, but the two people right now that he's picked for his national security establishment or national security picks were. So that's concerning to me. But I think Haines is definitely, of the people he's picked, the one that progressives should be most concerned about as of right now.
Yeah, and she also consulted with Palantir, which has been involved in all sorts of privacy issues and spying on the left and literally spying on the left in this country. Highly problematic. Linda Thomas Greenfield, as UN ambassador, she is a longtime career diplomat. She was purged by Tillerson in 2017 when he decided he didn't need anybody who knew about diplomacy.
Yeah.
She had been ambassador to Liberia, and she was assistant secretary of state for Africa during the Obama administration. So people tend to think that she's a fairly good pick.
Alejandro Mayorkas for Homeland Security Secretary, who was responsible for coming up with DACA under the Obama administration. So that's, a decent pick. But again, another kind of fungible Biden establishment Democratic standard pick there too.
Yes, he had some problems with the HB, I think it was EB-5 visa program that he was kowtowing a little bit to outside interests, according to the Inspector General, or outside stakeholders. But that scandal really never took off, as it were. We will talk more about Blinken as we go on, but we need to wrap things up here. Blinken, by all accounts, is an establishment guy who is a staffer who made some big mistakes, I think, in the Middle East, but supposedly has come around to thinking about it. Biden has already committed to at least reducing, if not shutting down, the drone program as it stands now. We shall see. But progressive foreign policy folks seem to think that there's going to be an opportunity for progressives to get to the table. But we will talk more about this and on tomorrow's program. Until then, bye-bye. And for those of you sticking around for the fun half, as we sign off to our listeners on, or I should say our viewers on Peacock, folks, you can also check out the show on the Peacock app. You can find it on the Choice channel. You can just search for the Majority Report on your Peacock app. Apparently, it's not available yet in Canada. I've been asked to, yes, by a Canadian listener of the program who searched for it, could not find it in Canada. So sorry about that. But we're going to have a show tomorrow. Alex Perrine will be joining us. And then we're going to be taking Thursday and Friday off this week, and we're going to head into the fun half of the program. Nomi will be joining us. Is she around? Should we bring her on? Just a reminder, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. You get 10% off. Check out our merch, holiday shopping. Nomi's show is on right after this one at 3 p.m. You can find it at youtube.com/The Nomi Key Show or patreon.com/The Nomi Key Show. In fact, here she is to tell you exactly who will be on that program. If you will, please.
Drum roll.
Well, just a reminder also, you can find the Antifada at patreon.com/The Antifada. Jamie's got all sorts of new programming this week. And here is Nomi.
Hi.
Hi. So who's going to be on your program today?
We have Joshua Kahn Russell, Chris Halali for a panel to talk about Trump's legacy and how much of it's going to be like infused into the Biden administration, whether we're conscious of it or not. And we have Josh Fox on to talk about John Kerry's as the climate envoy. So pretty standard leftist
I think
show.
you'll find he's the climate czar, not envoy.
But
I think it is envoy. I hate to correct you, Sam. I think it's envoy. Yes.
Oh man, is that
who
because
better as a messenger?
Are they afraid of using czar because they took so much grief about it under the Obama administration?
Because obviously they're communists, so you don't want czar, Russia,
but didn't
association.
Trump appoint a couple of czars too?
Yeah, but it doesn't count for them.
Well, technically, czar is not communist, so
right. But are you telling me Fox News audience knows the difference?
I thought they were more Russian friendly now.
Who, Trump or Biden?
I don't know. The Trump people. I guess they want to stay away. Oh, God, so stupid. All right. Well, that sounds like a fun show. Matt, what's happening tonight on TMBS?
Tonight on TMBS, the Michael Brooks Show YouTube page will be at time at 7 p.m. where David and I will have an announcement about the future. And so I'm excited about it. So, tune in tonight, folks.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, head into the fun half, 646-257-3920. Nomi, we're going to be talking a little bit about the New York State Senate and House, right? Veto-proof majority?
Yes. We'll talk about it when we get back.
All right, we'll also talk about some of Biden's appointments. We'll be right back after this. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Ooh.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
There we go. Sorry, had to unmute myself. Teacher Dan asks on the IM, which you can IM us via the Majority app. You can find that at majorityapp.com. Teacher Dan, what would be some examples of progressive foreign policy priorities? I understand the motivation to scrutinize Biden cabinet picks, and I know the status quo and establishment priorities, but what might progressives hope to get out of a Biden administration in terms of foreign policy? Well, I think you would see like a rollback of the drone program. I think you would see a rollback of our relationship with Saudi Arabia. I think you would see re-entering into some type of agreement to the extent that it's possible with Iran. Maybe a return of the recognition of of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I don't know.
Ending the genocide in Yemen too.
And yes, I mentioned the rollback, particularly that drawback, that program. I mean, I think like that Biden has committed, at least according to Kayla Lacey in the Intercept from I'm not sure how many weeks ago that was, has committed to rolling back that. Blinken was involved in that decision, but he. You know, the story of Blinken, it seems to me, is a guy who either was a staffer and supporting decisions that maybe his higher ups had and was going out there and doing that dutiful and had learned, or a guy who got a decent amount of things wrong and hopefully will learn from those mistakes and has at least acknowledged that they were mistakes. Whether that means going forward, that all of a sudden means that they're going to, operate in a different fashion? I don't know. I mean, I can tell you that I was supportive of at least what was the UN authorization. I was supportive of the Libya
NATO authorization.
Well, I wasn't supportive of necessarily the authorization from UN. I was supportive of it after the UN authorized intervention in Libya to stop a genocide. Now, they overshot that mandate and I think destroyed that mechanism to determine. I mean, it was done on the auspices that Gaddafi had threatened to basically annihilate Benghazi.
And not to mention, like, there were, don't forget, Obama, he promised no boots on the ground. So that was his whole perspective is he didn't want another Iraq. And as a result, what they forgot about Iraq, and credit to Biden, is that, like, you don't just like let a country shoot itself up and have a civil war and then just be like, see ya, have a nice day. And then there's all these weapons with like civilians and factions and families fighting each other. And then it's an oil rich state. And so that's how like ISIS can get them over the borders.
Well, and the problem was that they overshot the mandate and basically were looking for regime change. And it turned into a disaster.
Normally happens.
Well, I mean, it is. And I think my sense was at the time that I perceived there to be, for me, I think military intervention is justified in to prevent a genocide. And I cannot come up with a better way, or at the time, a better way of determining that than the UN authorizing it. And
Sam, I worked in Libya, as you know, right? This is the complicated thing, and I get so much slack on the internet for this. Not all, okay, so what they did was they tomahawked weapons facilities. They didn't put boots on the ground, and I'm not saying that there weren't CIA operatives there and all these other things that obviously happen. They tomahawked Gaddafi's weapons facilities, disarming him so he couldn't protect himself. And then after he was killed by who knows really who, then all of the citizens of Libya grabbed their favorite weapon that were just out there unprotected and started fighting with each other, because that's just how it's a tribal system. And they were already fighting with each other. And when you don't have protected borders by your own military, whether it's a citizen's military or a new government, it was a transition phase, and you're an incredibly oil rich country. And that's the eastern part near Egypt, right? Those borders are open. And so suddenly other forces like ISIS came in, and then the slave trade started to come in. And so it just wasn't a thought out process. And Obama didn't want to be part of it because he was so afraid of having another Iraq war on his record. Everything is about his record. And that, I think, is the concern, is that, it wasn't Iraq, clearly, but it also was not managed in a way, like they were so afraid of putting boots on the ground that they just tomahawked the weapons, which is smart because I saw those buildings, they imploded, and like the buildings next to them were pristine. It was very interesting how they strategized, and without a doubt there was unneeded, horrific civilian, it just slaughtering everywhere. It was chaos. But with that being said, like, we can't, as progressives, we have to be able to like see each intervention for what they are in that time and how different they are. And that's what's frustrating.
But I think they went further than, I believe that their intervention was justified only to the extent where you have the ability to undercut Gaddafi's ability to bomb the hell out of Benghazi, or, either by air or by, ground-based weapons. And that's where you stop. But they didn't.
Absolutely.
They completely undercut his regime, because I think there was a lot of pressure from the Europeans, frankly, and particularly the French, for regime change there. And
which was going to happen anyways. His son was like modernizing and bringing in businesses.
That's possible.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's not. But it's just a question of like, what is it possible to have a humanitarian intervention to stop a genocide that doesn't actually open the door to?
And like, here's another thing. I'm really frustrated with on the left where people are like martyring Gaddafi. I met some of the mothers, okay, like personally. Gaddafi pulled second graders out of school in the middle of school to go fight a war in Chad because he had this like insane idea that he was going to take over Africa?
I'm not in any way.
I know you're not. I just want to remind folks.
Right. Yes, I'm not in any way defending Gaddafi. I just think that more often than not, when we get involved,
Who's we?
The United States.
It is the United States. Okay, so this is. I know I'm going to get so much shit for this but we just have to understand it a little bit more. Like, I'm not siding with the U.S. on this by any means. I saw what happened on the ground. It was a disaster. I wrote an article on it afterwards. You can go check it out. It's online. Like, if you want to see all of my criticisms of what the U.S. did in Libya. But aside from that, we can't sit here and think that Gaddafi, like, where do we intervene as you're asking when it's a humanitarian crisis?
I mean, for me, the answer used to be determined by the UN. I mean, it was and that was why I was supportive of it, was basically because I wanted the UN to function as, because how do you determine whether there's actual genocide? Like, I don't know that there is the potential for genocide. I don't know that there is actually a mechanism to determine that in any type of sort of like objective way. And I just thought that was the most sort of democratic, to the extent that we could have a perspective on that. And unfortunately, it didn't work. Like, they didn't stop.
Here's the question. What if we were to do this with Yemen? How would we want that to look?
I would want us to stop enabling Saudi Arabia. It's clear that they cannot do it without our help. So we can stop making, the destruction of Yemen happen by just doing less rather than more. Do you know what I mean? Like, we can stop. We can pull back. We cannot provide the support services. We cannot provide technology. We cannot sell weapons
to Saudis.
Yes. Yeah. And I wouldn't want, I don't think that our involvement ever seems to work out.
Well, it has worked out.
Where's that?
World War II.
Yeah. No, yes. No, I agree. I agree.
No, I mean, but
I know what you're saying. Yes.
How do we reset our foreign policy and so that it's rooted in something much more than like a way for the U.S. to have more power and more money and control over multiple regions?
I would still, I don't know if I have, I certainly don't have as much faith in the UN as a mechanism, but I think that's like the best way to do it. Because if all the great powers sign off on it, I don't know what would have happened in the context of World War II, but I don't know that we can have a World War II like that again. I mean, that's the point, is that I think it's a different era now. Who knows in the future, but let's go to the phones for a moment. Calling from a 210 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is John from San Antonio.
John from San Antonio. How are you, John?
I'm good. So Republicans outperformed Trump in most House districts and senatorial races in 2016 and 2020. All campaigns have a win number, which consists of the number of votes in which they need to win the election. And most Democratic candidates who lost this year actually hit their win number and still lost to the strong turnout from Republicans. I thought Republicans, that the Republican brand was in the toilet because they lost 41 seats in 2018 and their ideas were generally unpopular. And I was surprised that they fared so well down ballot. I agree with you that most Republican voters vote on cultural issues, but many independent voters agree with them on economic issues. My friend has a show on Houston's Pacifica station. I heard many professionals state opinions that I don't agree with, but they've studied the issue. They can put up a coherent beliefs. Most people know that Trump's biggest strength revolves around issues around the economy. Most of your listeners know that Trump's a clown. The economy wasn't performing much better than Obama's last 2 years, but people believe that Trump's braggadocio lies, and many older voters and a lot of independents generally believe that trickle-down economics is still the preferable form of economics. Mike Siegel, who is a Democratic candidate in the 10th District of Texas in both 2018 and 2020, said the following: the Democratic Party is set up to be the party that fights for the poor people, but our messaging is about winning over moderate middle-class voters, and we're kind of caught in this trap. I mean, we were able to win the White House, but we're not transforming politics in this country. So this is back to my voice. Another impediment to change is the older electorate. It's going to be interesting to see the numbers of the percentage of eligible voters from the 18 to 29-year-old category. A few weeks before the election, you were doubtful that they would reach the same levels that they did in 2008 when the turnout was 49% among that group. I think they will break that record and that modern record. And they were dwarfed by turnout by older voters since 2004. Voters 60 and over have been voting at a 70% ratio in every presidential election. And this year's voters over 65 increased their margins to 22% of total vote cast, up from 16% in 2016. All three of the younger age brackets lost 2% of the vote. If you break it down into the 6 different age brackets, only the 50 through 64 stayed the same between 2016 and 2020. 2020, if you look at all voters 50 and above, they comprise 52% of the electorate, while in 2016 that number was 46%. So half of the voters that come of age during in the trickle-down era, and many of them don't see the need to curb income inequality and address the needs of the future, like climate change. These same voters helped elect Biden in the primaries. Their level of engagement is extremely high, but younger voters helped elect Biden against Trump because Trump won voters 50 and older by 5 points, while Biden won voters in their 40s by 10 points, voters in their 30s by 5 points, voters 24 to 29 by 11, and voters 18 to 24 by 34 points. Many of these same younger voters supported Bernie Sanders and his issue sets. So a big question in my mind is, will Biden address the needs of the voters who put him in office?
Well, that's a big windup for that question. I mean, there's two separate sort of paths, I guess, in which you answer something like that, John. And let us answer it with you off. But I appreciate the call, and I appreciate you being on top of that prediction about the youth. And I know you'll get back to me if I'm wrong. I don't hear
John from San Antonio. He's got a ledger of Sam takes.
Yeah. All right, John.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. I mean, the ability of Joe Biden to do anything is going to be is in part wrapped up in Georgia, right? I mean, there is a lot of stuff he can do via executive action, and I guess we'll see. But I don't know. I mean, what's your sense, Nomi, at this point? I mean, is there any way to really tell?
I mean, I'm not feeling it.
Right.
I think they're completely unresponsive to the pressure. It's almost like they took a sharp turn. Like they had a team meeting and said, all right, we don't need them. Let's move. I don't know. I really, what is there able, I don't think it's about Georgia. I think it's about making sure that there's institutional knowledge there on day one. And that institutional knowledge happens to be what got us to this moment, this like neoliberal leadership that, whether it's the Kerrys of the world or the Yellens of the world or who else, the Rahm Emanuels of the world. I just feel like it's not about this. All of their moves right now are not about Georgia. I don't know.
But I mean, don't you think, like a Rahm Emanuel is fundamentally different from, obviously that different positions, but from Kerry? I mean, I don't think Kerry has the aggressive the aggressive disdain of the left that Rahm Emanuel has. I don't think Yellen has the hostility towards the sort of, there's only so much. Look, there's only so much you can.
Again, I mean, Larry Summers could have been our Treasury Secretary. I mean, he at least went with Yellen, who's like neutral good.
No, I respect your
we're looking at the Biden administration, and so that's what colors, I think, all of our reactions. It has to, like, the expectations are within a specific time or specific framework, and I think he's trending like a 6 out of 10 or a 6.5 out of 10 within our expectations for Joe Biden.
I mean, I still feel like the left has leverage and they're not hitting the right pressure points. And I don't know what that is. Maybe it's happening behind closed doors and I'm not aware of it. Maybe it's union power, but I feel like many unions, not all of them, are eerily silent right now. And that just shows the institutional dilemmas that unions have in Democratic administrations or with Democratic governments, whether it's the governors or whoever. And I think we're just losing that moment.
Where do you think the leverage
lies?
I
was going to say, I don't know how much leverage the left has right now.
Well, I'm not convinced that it doesn't, but I'm not clear on where does it lie? Where does the leverage lie? And B, what are they aiming towards? I mean, foreign policy has never been, I think, the strength of the left in terms of building any type of which
is why Biden's been sneaking through. I mean, Blinken, whatever, but I mean the Haynes pick and potentially Michelle Flournoy, who I can't even say her last name. Is that how Flournoy? No. Yeah, she's. I thought I heard someone say something. They're going to be Flournoy. Yeah, they're going to be absolutely atrocious because the national security establishment is the degree of ideological difference between parties for people that work in that arena. The consensus is always more intervention, usually more militaristic intervention, more technology intervention, drones, etc. So there isn't as much of an ideological spectrum in that area. So both of those people are, I think, really bad.
There's no left bench in the foreign policy
absolutely
arena,
not.
It seems to me. And frankly, it's if Joe Biden's president 10 years ago, he's already, with the picks he's already done, he's already nominated 2 Republicans. You know what I mean? That's where it would have been 10 years ago.
But
and
this
it still
is the
may happen.
concern, for us as a movement to feel well, this is just Joe Biden.
No, I
Joe
understand,
Biden.
but where is the leverage? I think places like labor secretary, we may see,
sure,
or health and human services, let's say, or
HUD, health and human services,
yes.
Labor. I'm sorry, Treasury. I feel like it was just a bad one. Any of his key economic advisors. I mean, he has this economic team that's supposed to deal with this economic crisis, like Obama did, and there's absolutely no whiff of any recognition, respect of
Have
labor.
Anybody who's been appointed there yet, though?
No appointments. As far as I'm concerned.
Well, that's my point.
But there's been rumblings, right?
Right.
I mean, even just the transition team in itself. There's a reason why people were outraged about the transition team. It's just disrespectful, not just
but
to
aren't
working people who got them elected.
Outraged about the transition team because there seems to be sort of more deference to the people who won in the general election, who came on in the sort of the second version, Biden 2.0 versus the primary.
I think there's plenty of people on the transition team that are not electoral at all. And I think we as a movement have to stop thinking electorally and think about this moment, this crisis. This is, and they have to think that way. All I'm reading in the press is the wars between the left and the centrists, as if we are an electoral fight, but we have to think about what happens as a result of not managing this crisis properly and who gets affected. And how does Joe Biden think his legacy is going to be laid out? This is not 2008. I don't know. It's just we're so analytical about it and we're not feeling maybe it's because people haven't been massively evicted yet.
Yeah. I don't know. What are you measuring this against? It's, what positions do you need to see a progressive to think
I just listed through HUD.
Right. Okay.
Kerry is climate envoy. What the F is that? That's just like give him a job. Here, climate. Nobody cares about that.
Really?
It's the first iteration of that job. I would have much preferred it to go to somebody, say, who's steeped in climate change activism, someone the Sunrise Movement may have recommended. I mean, if you're going to create a job, I would imagine. Right. Well, okay, so that's something. I wish it wasn't John Kerry, but Biden's engaging in these kinds of transactional politics that have dominated politics for years and years. The only person who would have changed that would have been Bernie Sanders, and that. But even that is transactional. I
think a lot of people wouldn't have dealt with this situation. I think they're so.
He didn't give it to Larry. Apparently, Larry Summers was promised by Obama twice for Treasury Secretary, and he reneged on it. And then he thought, well, now next time around, Hillary Clinton or now Joe Biden in 2020, he thought he was going to get some position. The fact that they are bucking people like that, and I don't think Rahm Emanuel is actually getting anywhere close. Actually, I think he's a trial balloon by people in the Biden administration to Biden camp to try to make their pick seem better, right? Okay, that's incremental progress. And that I just my expectations for Biden are so low. And I think that's backed up by everything he's done throughout his career.
So what I'm trying to say is we can't sit here and say, oh, okay, well, he's doing what we expected of him because we thought the expectations were low. Crises are handled by the pressure from the outside on leadership. FDR didn't come in as this massive progressive leader.
But I think that's different with activism versus analysis, right?
I'm talking about unions, that activism. I'm talking about movement. I'm not even talking about Sunrise. I'm talking about actual transactional politics. There is leverage I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not being reported on enough. But this is such a massive. I mean, they're so obsessed with preserving Obama's legacy and how he handled the last economic crisis.
I'm delineating the difference between should there be leftist pressure and do I encourage leftist pressure on literally every single person he's appointing, and is every person he's appointing not ideal? Absolutely not. I encourage leftist pressure. I just think in terms of being an analyst, there we go. Being an analyst of the situation, I realistically don't expect much more from Joe Biden, even with some of that leftist pressure. I just don't,
So unions, I'm still trying to get. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying, Nomi. Is that from an activist standpoint, the job is to never be satisfied, and to certainly not negotiate with yourself just because the expectation. I mean, this is the reason why, despite the fact that this is the reason why I would not support Joe Biden in a primary. This is exactly the reason. But despite that, the point is you still pressure. Okay, so what does that look like is what I'm asking. Yeah. Is
and by the way, that was our argument to everybody. Let's just be very clear. People showed up, and our argument, right, every day about, well, we can pressure him. But now people are like, oh my God, they're signaling Rahm Emanuel. Oh, what did we expect?
But wait a second. But I've seen. I mean, to the extent that, let's say, we can pressure, right? Mm-hmm. I've seen every member of the squad publicly go out there and talk about, Rahm Emanuel covering up the shooting of Laquan McDonald, and which I mean, frankly, the list of why I would not want Rahm Emanuel. It's not just because he did that. Frankly, in fact, I have a longer list, and one that I think is more relevant to him being in the federal government, but that is the one that makes him even that much more toxic. I mean, that's the politics there, right? Is it's hard to sort of say hey, this is a guy who basically said F the left 15 years ago. This is a guy who wanted to cut bait on the ACA, because it was too ambitious. This is the guy who basically, this is the guy who was, brought in to basically, break the kneecaps of anybody who's on the left. That to me is the compelling reason why you don't want him in there. But it is, from a political standpoint, describing all that and getting people invested in that is much harder than the fact that he was also engaged in this cover up. I mean, that shows he's also a piece of garbage in a slightly different way, I guess. But I mean, and
it's toned up for the moment on top of it, just
right, and so
basic politics.
Keeping Rahm Emanuel out keeping out people who are Obama knots, but also, like, there's a range, right? Like aggressively progressive through to just like, well, I mean, I'm not anti-progressive. It's just like there was an opportunity for me to get a job at Uber and to smash regulations. And so I took it, because I wanted, I wanted a place in Aspen. I mean, there's that, but that's like, that's like number 2 on the quadrant of people you want to keep out before you get to people who are going to actively fight for progressive stuff. But it seems to, and part of it is because who they're staffing all the sort of like tertiary, quaternary, I don't know, the lower level positions who are staffing up there. So, okay. So aside from that, like that's an example of what you're talking about, right? Like leverage, right? Or are you talking about something that's
it's not like we are, so there's so many different areas to pressure and expose, right? The squad exposing is great pressure, but specific unions who have real agenda items pressuring in an aggressive way, an open way. And like I said, maybe this is happening a little bit more behind the scenes and we're just not aware of it. But it's also not playing out like they're winning either. So it does show what kind of pressure is being put out there. There's like such institutional fear in the Democratic Party. There's institutional fear from very transactional unions that are clearly and understandably dependent on budgets and lots of things that they have to move to protect their workers, understandable. But there's also real leverage in pushing back against the Uber executives and the Tony Wests and all these folks who just passed Prop 2, what is it, 200 or 22?
22, yeah.
22, I already forgot. And now they're buying ads in New York newspapers to do to New York. Like they're trying to spread this, and there's no active, continuous campaign against what is very clearly Biden-esque policies at this point. This isn't like Biden's friends and family. This is now institutionalized in the administration that's about to take place. And so, yes, there's the squad getting angry and there are tweets and there are emails being blasted, which raise folks money. All of that stuff is valuable. But if we want to get to the core power, like the staffing issue, I mean, that's what Elizabeth Warren understood very well, right? Is that personnel is policy. And up and down the line right now, there's very little indication that there's any recognition of the crisis of working people right now. I'm not talking about the left. Everybody's so obsessed with this like left centrist war, which is an electoral war. It's a war for power, even mentioning the squad and Capitol Hill. I am talking about what concentrated power the left has in pushing the Biden administration. So Sarah Nelson understands power like nobody else, and frankly, in the last 50 years, I think. And she's been very open and I mean open in a way that like I was even surprised in her pressure of the Biden administration. But Janet Yellen, like they said that Janet Yellen was going to be something that the left and the centrists could agree on, somebody that they could agree on. Are you kidding me? The fact that they're saying that the Biden administration can get away with saying things like the left are terrorists right now, that they can get away with that, shows.
But I just don't know. I'm sorry. Like, who is it that you wanted to be Treasury Secretary?
Oh, Joe Stiglitz. There's a name right there. Let's just throw that one out. I don't know. There's plenty of people that could be on the list that could be pressured beyond Elizabeth Warren and whoever else. I mean, that's pretty much it that the left was putting forward. We have to be. We have to be more theoretical and creative with arguments. I'm not the one leading, I'm just saying like, it just feels like people got they just surrendered a bit and put all their energy into like, getting Bernie and Warren into places rather than really understanding what the failures of the Obama administration were. And granted, there are plenty of writers who are doing this. I'm not like just there's a lot of folks who are saying this.
I'm still having a tough time sort of like grasping on like
so name an organization that's put forward. Organizations apply pressure, not reporters, not us. Organizations, unions apply pressure.
I think a lot of that has been centered around getting Bernie in at labor or getting
exactly.
Yes. And
that's a strategic error, obviously. But to back up kind of what you're saying,
Clyburn came out apparently and said he wants Sanders in Biden's administration, which is not.
Oh, great! This is smoke and mirrors. This is a mirage. This isn't real.
Yeah.
Like, Come on.
So the David Dayen finds that the Prospect has learned that Brian Deese, an Obama official, now executive with the asset management giant BlackRock, is the leading contender to direct the National Economic Council, and he was literally directly involved in skirting activists away who were trying to get BlackRock, which is the leading fossil fuel investor in the world, to try to divest, and he was responsible for pushing them out and kind of like the PR there. So kind of flies in the face of Biden's more progressive than expected agenda on climate change, as influenced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Sunrise Movement, who I would imagine will be vocal about this in the coming hours.
So on that note, I feel like their energy right now is less focused on the economic crisis that we're facing in workers and more on suppressing the rising left and giving the left any movement.
But Nomi, hold on for 1 second. Like, look, there's only two things that can happen here in terms of dealing with the crisis with workers, right? And that is directly tied into COVID. And you need to come up with two sets of solutions. One set of solution involves, if you have 50 senators, you can go in and you can pass a massive stimulus via reconciliation, and that can happen within the first 3 or 4 weeks, right? I mean, you have the template there. It's the HEROES Act, for better or for worse. And a lot of those things that are involving just expenditures are going to go in reconciliation. If you do not have those two senators in Georgia, the only thing you're doing is basically a slate of executive actions.
That would range. There's plenty of executive actions.
I actually think that it's probably, I would imagine that, and it's certainly, you can't do as much as you would want because it's just executive action. But I would imagine in the event that the Democrats don't win in Georgia, you're going to see more of a student debt relief than you would have had they just passed it via reconciliation, because that is going to be one of the mechanisms in which you can create stimulus to the economy. I mean, one of the things that I think, speaks to the value of having a Yellen as opposed to Stiglitz, who doesn't know, has not had, for instance, who's not worked in a place like Treasury, doesn't know, is that the big thing is, how do you rescue essentially this whole thing that Mnuchin is pulling back? If there's, because in the scenario where we don't win in Georgia, there's no way to do any stimulus. McConnell's not going to do shit.
Right.
And so you've got Mnuchin pulling back those loan guarantees for states and cities. It's also corporate as well, but it's states and cities. And as much as the states and cities have not used that loan guarantee, the fact that it's existed has been able to maintain the value of their bonds because there's a backstop there, even if it's theoretical. And so you need somebody who's going to be able to go in there and on day one, be able to work it out with the Fed so that those things still exist. And so, I think part of the problem is that there's literally the country's on fire. And the question is who do you get in there who knows how, where,
stuff.
What?
This was the Obama argument, though. Obama was like, the country's on fire. We need people who institutionally understand how to fix Wall Street. And that was their argument. We're falling for the same. All I'm saying is I understand, but this is a problem when we're so reliant on institutional knowledge that got us to this place.
Well, that's what was so effed up about electing Donald Trump this argument was what I was saying 4 years ago. There's some things that are just there's a certain inevitability. This guy was able to put us into a hole such that it's going to make it that much harder for progressives to get in there, because there is such an obvious argument that you need people. That's it's the same argument with Ron Klain. It's yeah, you know what? I do want the guy who organized the last pandemic. I want somebody who's
he didn't F it up. Let's just be very clear. Putting Ron Klain in he managed it well. He didn't break apart, like push for gig worker economies and
Right. I
mean, all I'm saying is it's one thing to appoint somebody who actually managed a crisis properly. It's another thing to appoint somebody who managed a crisis that benefited Wall Street, took on unions, exacerbated student debt, exacerbated a housing crisis that already fueled our last economic disaster. So all I'm saying is, it's great to have people who have institutional knowledge. It's not great when you pick the people that had institutional knowledge that literally drove us into this crisis.
Did Yellen do that?
There's been a lot of complicated writing about her. I'm not saying that she's the worst of the worst as a Larry Summers, but she's a complicated legacy.
I agree.
Sam, just quickly, much like the national security establishment, except less so with economists, because you can find some outside of the mainstream and they're doing the right thing. But in terms of people Biden was realistically picking, there isn't enough ideological diversity in that area. And she was someone who's respectable, at least.
I think, obviously, Elizabeth Warren would be a lot more proactive as Treasury Secretary. She was never going to get in there, and there was never going to be a Biden administration that was going to aggressively go after that. But Yellen was in favor of more regulation on the banks following the crisis. She got more hawkish when she became Fed chair. But that's a slightly different perspective than being one of the Fed governors, or as it were. I mean, so, and she's supposedly backed off that hawkishness. I just think that yes, would I prefer a progressive Treasury Secretary? I mean, would I have preferred Warren? Yes, although I do think there's a problem with having Baker appoint somebody to fill her seat essentially in Massachusetts. But and I hear what you're saying. I mean, I don't know how, I can't quite figure out how would we see beyond keeping out the worst of the worst? Where is this leverage that exists? And why, obviously, the left, if the left had that much leverage, it wouldn't be Joe Biden.
It's not about the left's leverage. It's about the moment. The moment is the leverage. The moment that we're in, the economic crisis that we're in, the solutions, as far as I can see, and as far as been written everywhere, even in the Wall Street effing Journal, is that he is not taking the appointments are not taking this crisis seriously enough. The crisis is the leverage, and who can push and pressure through this economic crisis is, every union leader in America.
I just don't know what those appointments are yet. I mean,
listen, I don't either. And I think we should probably map it out. It'd be really interesting the way that we map out states, actually map out the names of all the appointments so we can keep track of them. But even they come in, like you said, with their own staff, from I'll give you an example of just a simple one. When the DNC chair took over, Tom Perez, he brought in all of his staff from labor, institutional people who really didn't understand politics, to be completely honest. So it's really in these little appointments. That's where the leverage is, because it's embarrassing. It's death by 1,000 cuts. But if we start saying if it's all about Bernie and Warren, as we've discussed, it's just bad strategy 101.
Yes, but I think that
one more thing. I think they're more concerned with killing the energy of the left, whatever exists, as loud as we are, as organized or loosely organized as we can be. It has been a hindrance on them. It's been a pain in their ass. And I think that they're doing all that they can in different ways to make sure that we can be stifled. And that is as simple as not acknowledging us. That's as simple as Jess Morales, a union leader, saying that we're all terrorists when she was on the left with us 2 months ago. I think they're very concerned about a growing force showing up on the streets and doing exactly what we promised we would do. You know what would stop that? If they actually made some real concessions.
I agree. I mean, that people should be pushing. What groups, what unions or PACs or is that you feel should be doing more that aren't?
Everyone.
Spill the tea. Give me some names.
Listen.
What is everyone? Everyone around me is just like a 14-year-old and a 7-year-old.
Listen, I want to be careful about this, but I've said this before. It would be really great if there was some sort of unionized labor perspective, not unionized like lowercase union, like big union of labor coming together and putting forward a set of demands that are just unequivocal and basic, and getting some real public pressure behind that, including lawmakers and folks signing on. Yeah.
Aren't the unions I would imagine you're going to get your teachers' unions are focused like a laser on just like who is going to be the Secretary of Education, right? Like, because they want to make sure that they're there is, I'm just, okay. All right. So
another side of this is, I think another thing that's happening is folks are doing a lot of stuff backroom, right? And I'm even cautious about what I'm saying right now. A lot of this is happening backroom, giving the Biden administration the benefit of the doubt during this transition. But this is where the power lies. This is where the pressure really,
this is like a form is function type of thing, because you're criticizing people for not getting out there, being vocal about it. You're being quiet about it too.
Well, I'm not a union leader. I don't want to call out I'm generalizing for a reason, but all I'm saying is that if I just gave you an example, if there were, say, 5 unions that came together, their membership signed on to a set of demands that all of them are influenced by, and progressive lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers across the country sign on to things that they stand by, because they stand by those unions and they stand by those policies. And it's not something that necessarily could, might be the most controversial thing, but it's showing that the administration is taking this economic crisis seriously. And to that point, every day, Joe Biden should be getting on air and talking about it. Just that alone.
Yes. I don't know.
I was hammering during the campaign. Why was he not on air talking about how we need more stimulus checks? We need more stimulus checks. We need unemployment insurance. It's McConnell. It's McConnell.
The entire
it's McConnell.
Democratic. Well,
that would have exposed Nancy Pelosi's complete inability to come to an agreement with Mnuchin and then throw it to McConnell. But there
is an absolute a management of expectations that's going on here, which is keep them low. And, but that is, that's a second area, that, right? That is one is politics as it creates expectations among the public. And the other is an inside game as to who is going to get in with a certain amount of personnel. And that's there's only so much that we can do in that respect.
But the inside game is affected by the outside pressure.
No, I understand.
Or the union's membership.
I understand. And, we talked to, we talked to David Dayen about, the process of him, for instance, reporting on this inside track. Obviously, if somebody's coming out and saying that, who is it that he just, Brian Deese is up for the National Economic Council. That is basically a bat signal for people to get up in arms and complain about stuff like that. And, my senses of Yellen is that she is not optimal, but is is she worth, is the marginal difference between Yellen and whoever it would be, I can't even name a person, would be Treasury Secretary, is that marginal difference, more important than maybe getting someone who's genuinely progressive at HUD, or genuinely a progressive at labor, or genuinely progressive, or, at least not pro austerity at the OMB. That's, those, in terms of the moment, those are the positions. And so it's sort of, I don't know if the marginal difference with Yellen would be worth it at this juncture. I don't know.
Well, HUD is, listen, January 1st, cities across America, you're going to have massive evictions
all over the place. Yeah.
Small business. Let's talk about that. In New York, in October, 80% of small businesses in New York City alone did not pay their rent. can we process like what's actually happening right now?
Well, yeah, that is a failure, it seems to me, of what's going on in Congress.
Absolutely.
Of Pelosi's leadership and of Schumer's leadership. And, we're hearing at least Schumer, far be it from me, but Schumer's at least, he is putting out the fires where he sees them, where we light them, right? Like where, you see Dianne Feinstein, she steps down. Now it's Durbin, but it's better than Feinstein. Well, it is. I mean, honestly, she's just, atrocious. It's not a huge upgrade, but, and he's coming out with Warren and saying $50,000 on student debt, and that's going to make a difference. I mean, if it is executive actions, the only way to get any type of stimulus going, that $50,000 is going to be one end of the spectrum, and they're going to end up doing, I don't know, 20,000 or 25,000, and
because Biden's proposed $10,000 means tested one is like pretty crappy compared to the one being floated more by Schumer and Warren. But like, I feel like they need to remove all means testing and also should focus on canceling federal government loans. I don't understand why that isn't integral.
Doubt. I have very little doubt that if he doesn't have an opportunity to do this legislatively, they're not going to have a means test in there, because it's just going to be just incredibly cumbersome. By the time you set up that bureaucracy to do means testing in the context of an executive action, it's going to be.
I mean, that doesn't prevent Democrats from constantly being over the top with the bureaucracy, the means testing, COBRA, all of these Pelt grants, whatever. It's so in their DNA at this point. I'm hoping against it, but an executive action would have to be more sweeping. But that would require Biden to be a decisive leader, which I don't even know if he's proven that he's been very principled in anything really when it comes to just kind of pushing.
I think that's helpful.
Besides,
I think the fact that he's not principled is actually helpple.
It's a double-edged sword in that area. But that's why I think it was
Doug Henwood of all people. Gotta say, Joe could have done a lot worse than Yellen.
Sure. Of course he could have, but like, I guess you guys are missing. Like, if we start to say like, well, this is just like just
I'm
being
saying
numb
this about
to
Yellen,
Trump.
but I mean, if he's put, that's the thing, is that like, I think particularly at the context of like Treasury, like that is a win. I mean, I think it could have been, that is a win. Like stopping the not the worst is actually a win. We lost this fight already. We are like, there's a certain amount of bailing water here. And Yellen is, at the bottom line is that like, look, there's only so much room for Treasury and the Fed to do anything at this point, right? Like Treasury, the best thing that she's going to be able to do is to salvage that thing that Mnuchin has pulled back. There's just only so much that can happen in this instance. You need to have the Senate. Spend the money. And if they don't spend the money, there's just no money. It's not happening. And then it just becomes a series of executive actions. And I think they're going to do anything because they're going to be desperate because of this situation that is like headed towards us like an oncoming freight train. And so, the idea is like, who do you get in there that's not going to stop stuff? like this moment, like the problem that we had then in the wake of the financial crisis is there was a lot of people in that administration who were going to stop stuff. They were going to stop. Jason Furman, we need to we do $700 billion and then we immediately pivot. Those are the people you don't want in the room. You want the context and the situation, and really in many respects, the conventional wisdom, which has changed dramatically in the 12 years since 2008. You want that to be the force. So you want to basically make sure that there's no obstacles to this moment defining what happens. And so like a person like Janet Yellen, who's not going to come in, and my assessment, and I could be wrong, I've never met her, I've never been in the room with her, like all this stuff, just like from what I've read, is that she's not going to be the person to say, wait a second, we need to turn off the spigots. And and that's all because the thrust of this is going to be open the spigots. That to me is the default position that everybody's going to have. And so the problem's not that like we don't have enough like sort of like progressives in the Senate, let's say. The problem is that we have one or too many Joe Manchins who are going to stop it. And so within the context of the administration is like, how do you make sure there's not going to be somebody who's going to have the ability to sort of like stop the momentum? And so that's why, I mean, particularly for Yellen, that's my sort of sense. But let's go to some sound clips here. This is a fun one. So you've been following this whole Sidney Powell thing, Nomi?
Oh,
I'm
yes.
obsessed with her as a feminist icon.
I've noticed
Queen, slay queen, Sidney Powell, queen, go off queen.
Are you guys familiar with this guy who's Steven Crowder?
Yes.
I'm being facetious. Of course you are. Steven
I don't
Crowder.
know.
We all know Steven Crowder is like that. Steven Crowder answers the question like, what if the great Santini's kid, dad, didn't die in a plane crash and continued to pressure him through his teenage years into young adulthood, and was constantly a force that was like scrutinizing everything his young son did and forced him to deny maybe a lot of like, there's sometimes when you have like a very overbearing father, like if he's a wrestling coach, sometimes what happens is you don't come into your own and you live out somebody else's life. Well, that in many respects is Steven Crowder. And when you do that, often you just take other people's word for it and don't assess things and people around you for what is obvious. So in other words, like when you're assessing someone like Sidney Powell and you've lived under the specter of your father saying, I want you to be a tough guy, and whatever, when your father is sitting there forcing you to be someone maybe that you're not in your mind, like, what happens is you just accept other people's premises. So maybe you would misinterpret like what you're getting from like a Sidney Powell. Like instead of like seeing like, wow, this woman seems like out of her mind, you would say, no, wait a second. She's the greatest lawyer who's ever lived.
As they come, about as credible as they come. She's the one who swooped in, basically was a part of the defense team that proved Michael Flynn was innocent. She talked about specifically, we've talked about ballots, poll watchers, we've talked about ballots being harvested, right. We've talked about them not following the constitutional parameters. But there is another component to this, and we don't know. I want to be clear. We don't know that there is massive fraud occurring from Dominion voting systems, and there is some misinformation out there, both from the left and the right. However, this attorney who works with the Trump administration, Sidney Powell, research her, look up her credibility, had this to say yesterday regarding Dominion voting.
We're fixing to overturn the results of the election in multiple states. And President Trump won by not just hundreds of thousands of votes, but by millions of votes that were shifted by this software that was designed expressly for that purpose. We have sworn witness testimony of why the software was designed. It was designed to rig elections. He was fully briefed on it. He saw it happen in other countries. It was exported internationally for profit by the people that are behind Smartmatic and Dominion. They did this on purpose. It was calculated. They've done it before. We have evidence from 2016 in California. We have so much evidence, I feel like it's coming in through a fire hose.
Whoa. To be clear, this is not a woman who typically makes claims that she can't prove.
No,
or
she's
dresses
a
like
QAnon.
Corey
Let me be
Feldman.
clear. She never makes claims.
Wait, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, go to her Twitter, and she's talking about QAnon and other nonsense like that.
Can we go back? I wish we had the ability, we had the technology to like put a reverb on that and loop it and just have it just like this is she doesn't approve. You just go back. Remember now, folks, to be fair to Steven Crowder, this clip is almost from a week ago.
Yeah.
So it was way back.
New evidence came in
a week ago. So that was, way back there.
Yeah, and I guess he hasn't caught up to the fact that she's been excommunicated or actually was never really officially a part of the Trump team, according to the always trustworthy Rudy Giuliani.
Well, that was after they booted her, but this is before they booted her when she was apparently just like she was Perry Mason. Go back just a little bit and let's hear this again.
Whoa. To be clear, this is not a woman who typically makes claims that she can't prove.
Or dresses like Corey
Let me
Feldman,
be clear.
usually.
She never makes claims she can't prove.
Right. You're a lawyer.
Outstanding attorney with impeccable credibility in terms of not only her credentials, but the different fights that she's had. Right. I mean, there are tons of attorneys, every attorney I know has a ton of respect for her and the types of things that she's looking at. And certainly we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Recognizing what she's even allowed to talk about now versus the strategy of the things that they're going to get into. And really, this is something you covered, I want to say maybe like during the week of the election, was we talked about the different connections, the actually exporting it internationally and the software. These are all different facts that have already been verified. Yeah. And she's putting them all together in this particular battle.
She has a crazy winning record. I think a lot of people don't know that. Would you put her, like, if she were an athlete, because we'll play Stephen Knows Sports later, would she be a Michael Jordan or a Wayne Gretzky in
her area? For sure. I'm not hiring her to be a family law attorney because that's a different thing.
Or a hand model?
Definitely not a hand model. She's not going to be there.
No.
What?
Probert?
She would be a probert, an enforcer. Few old hockey.
Good stuff. Oh, no, continue. Oh, no, continue. They just keep going on and on. This is like
I just want to point out that they're in robes, just like vouching for somebody's credibility. They're on talk shows in robes and talking about the winning percentage of lawyers.
Well, that's because it's a comedy show.
Right. Oh, right. Yeah. I'm laughing so hard for the right reasons.
Like they're wearing goofy costumes. Go ahead.
Fans remember the Probert reference.
I'm from St. Louis, so
but I do want to go to. But let me hit you with a few quick facts as to the actual history of Dominion, and then we'll get into some of the errors, inconsistencies that we've seen with this election. So these are all verifiable. The sources are available at louderwithcrowder.com. We'll have the link below in the description. All
right,
I want you guys.
Yeah. And also, again, Dominion was used in Utah and was used in Florida, and I guess they manufactured it so. Very, very intricate software, so that the votes in Florida and Utah would not be exported for profit. Just the votes in the
Emma, you fell right into the trap, didn't you?
Right.
The old make it work in Utah and Florida so that we can.
I guess I didn't go to coding school enough, so I didn't know that was a pretty easy way to put it into the algorithm. Yeah, she's just her winning percentage as a lawyer.
What did Crowder do? What did Crowder do? Like, where does Crowder go from this? Does anybody do? We need to have somebody check out and see what Crowder did about oh my God, this is completely. How could they take Michael Jordan? How could they take Michael Jordan out of the game?
Michael Jordan was taking steroids. That's what happened. What he didn't know was she just showed up on stage at these press conferences.
She was more Dennis Rodman. She was more Dennis Rodman. Let's be real, in terms of. Cuckoo. Not all there.
I want to point out this video by at Jose on YouTube. If you search Jose, not a J, this will come up. But Building Voter Fraud Conspiracy Theories with Steven Crowder does a really good. This is, I think, pre the Powell stuff. But he goes over the 5-hour election stream and how like Crowder perpetuated a lot of the narratives that we're all familiar with now about like Sharpies and that sort of crap. And it's a very entertaining dissection of how much of an idiot Crowder is.
Did he start this theory? Like, is this where it came from?
The Sharpies?
Yeah,
he was like one of the main people like peddling it. It's like we saw this on Twitter, and then he gets massive views, Crowder, millions
of views. I mean,
but Tucker Carlson says big tech is conspiring against right wingers. So I don't know.
And
on
big
the other
Sharpies.
hand,
he managed to get underneath the.
Joe Kaplan.
Well, imagine how much more he would have.
Did you guys see that
gotten
documentary on
exposure.
HBO about the Bulls when Phil Jackson was like, Michael Jordan doesn't play for us. He's not.
Yeah.
He just showed up in the uniform, and like I benched it. I was just like, get out of here, man.
That's why he went to go play baseball.
Exactly. That's why he went to go play baseball, because he was never part of the Chicago Bulls. People didn't know that.
They really tried to. Why? Why was he doing that?
I'm being facetious. That was
No. I don't know, but there was controversy around the show. Didn't they criticize him for something? Didn't he like act out? Jordan, wasn't there some sort of?
I thought Jordan came across as fine in that.
I didn't watch it. I was just
the
like
ESPN one. Yeah,
I don't know which one. There was a documentary, and
it was pretty cool, to be honest.
I thought it was amazing.
I thought he came across as fine. Like, you're not going to get to be that kind of.
Oh no, he came across as like, we have LeBron, who's like, he's kind of corny. Michael Jordan is mean, but in a really cool sports way.
He's just super intense dude who, like, I don't know.
Like,
I felt like, for a guy like that, like my feeling is just like, if you're going to be that good at something, I'm not surprised that you're like demanding of other people in that respect. And you can walk away from a guy like that too. You don't want to be involved in it.
Right. And you have the clout to be demanding of, which is why the Sidney Powell comparison is so apt, because, all she did was make everyone around her better, even when she wasn't actually a part of the team.
That's right. And she's at the top of the Q pyramid.
Pyramid's a good word to associate with these folks.
Perfect association.
Calling from a 213 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Tom from Yakubia.
Tom from what?
Yakubia.
Okay. What's happening, Tom?
Yakubia. I live up here with the White Devils.
All right. Good. Glad to hear that.
I want to talk with you about the judge in the case, Judge Brand, the judge who said Rudy Giuliani's argument was a Frankenstein's monster.
Yes, I think in Pennsylvania, where they were basically just like, you haven't. Yes, it was
Republican appointed judge too. Yeah.
Yes, he was a Republican appointee. Emma's right, and he was appointed in a deal between Pat Toomey and Bob Casey, the Republican and Democratic senators from Pennsylvania, and Casey appointed a guy named Malachi Mannion. And I was just wondering what you think about this kind of deal. It was in 2012. It was the election year, and Obama was working with what he had, which was a Republican-controlled Congress at the time. Do you think he? I can't imagine Biden isn't going to do things like this. And then,
I can tell you,
whereas you could get two nominations, you're only going to get one if you're lucky.
No, I think what the reason why they had to have that type of negotiation was because Patrick Leahy was treating blue slips as if they were some type of like precious tradition. In fact, which is where a home state senator can basically withhold acceptance of a judicial nominee. And it's just a Senate tradition. And Patrick Leahy took it to another extreme, essentially. And so that is really more of an issue for the Judiciary Committee. And this is presuming that Biden has, a Senate that is, a majority Democrat, or at least the, 50-50. So if it's Mitch McConnell, they're not going to get anything. And I will also say that watching Schumer get rid of DIFI as chair of that, or at least the Democratic leader on the judiciary, indicates to me that organizations like Brian Fallon's are having some impact anyways on at least that mechanism. I think there's I think like there was a lot of people came out of the Obama administration who know that they effed up. And I think I think they're all going to function differently? No, but I think there's going to be some who do. So I don't think we're going to see that same type of situation. I think there are already lists, and I think that they're going to take judicial appointments seriously, even if McConnell's completely obstructive. They're going to have lists, and if it takes 2022 to push them through, they're going to do that. That's my sense, anyways. But appreciate the call.
I was thank you very much. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye. You really? Wait, what? You're going to call me later? Calling from a 605 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from? 605. 605.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, what's your name?
Hi, Sam. This is Nick from Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Nick from Sioux Falls. What's on your mind?
Well, a couple things. First of all, pertaining to our pandemic response, I think you guys kind of hit on this at the start of the show, but one of the things that's really been killing us is that the healthcare workers can hardly stay at work because they keep, getting exposed to the virus outside of work.
Right.
There was a piece that I think CBS News did. It was making the rounds on Twitter yesterday morning, where I think it was Friday night, they were kind of hovering around some of the bars downtown and talking to people going in and out who were not wearing masks. And there was one young woman they talked to, probably early 20s, who was like, oh yeah, I'm an RN in a COVID unit, and here I am showing up to a bar with no mask on. And the national reporter is like, okay, that seems weird. Why are you doing this? Oh, well, I already had the virus, so I'm good. It's like, no, not really how that works. You should still be wearing a mask, maybe not showing up to a bar on a weekend when you're treating COVID patients.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is we don't really have a sense of whether once you've had the antibodies, if you can't be a carrier still. We don't know.
They're already starting to tell people, though, that they have to keep their guard up if they've been.
Yes. I mean, of course. Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it's like you should, of course you should do that. I mean, frankly, if you had any sense of like responsibility to the community, you would do it just to signify like people should wear masks. I mean, that's it,
Right.
I mean,
but the other thing is like with healthcare workers right now, there's a bit of a movement around this in terms of public, like not only are they more likely to potentially spread to, there's a situation in which being on the front lines, obviously they could spread, but also public transportation. There's like a big issue with public transportation right now where there's being pushback from folks who work with healthcare workers and that they're afraid that they're going to be carrying, like in New York, for instance, by going on the subway, you're more at risk by commuting to multiple places per day.
Right.
There's like this weird niche movement happening. I was just reading about it in terms of healthcare workers being more at risk because of transportation issues, of visiting multiple people per day. And now folks are afraid of even working with healthcare workers.
Right. Well, appreciate the call. I mean, that's part of the dilemma here. Like, for instance, there is not a significant amount of data that schools are actually terribly dangerous. There does not appear to be a lot of I saw that. There's not
the camera went to sleep. Sorry.
There's not a lot of data that shows that schools are unsafe. For the most part, they appear to be fairly safe. At least in the version of schools where you have, 1/3, 1/2 of the kids in there. But the problem is what's happening in the community is going to have direct bearing on that. And, in a sane world where the federal government has authorized payments to, let's say, restaurants and to workers and to small businesses and to their employees, and you would close the restaurants and the bars and keep the schools open. And the gyms, yes, of course.
Are you kidding me? Like in New York, gyms are still open and schools are shut down?
It's nuts. It's nuts. But we don't have that. Now, like the sort of hierarchy of blame starts with a Republican Senate and a Republican presidency. And then I would also say, and then at least a Democratic controlled House that did not, for whatever reason, and I think this was just, I think the first error was just blind stupidity. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, someone I am not sympathetic towards, was aware in April that when you went back for that second version of the PPP, the Democrats came in there and their big ask was just to expand the PPP, which is exactly what the Republicans were wanted anyways. So much so that there was still money left in that fund. Instead of using that as leverage to get money to cities and states to deal with hospitals and to deal with these very issues, right? Which is like, the city wouldn't necessarily have as much money as you would want the federal government to provide in terms of like dealing with restaurants and rent relief and whatnot. But I mean, all of this should have been at least on the table then. And then I would have also, like we were saying, take Trump's offering you $1.8 trillion. Who knows what it goes towards? Take it. Make Mitch McConnell vote against it. Because now you need a narrative that Mitch McConnell is stopping funds to getting to the American public. Because if we don't get Georgia on January 22nd, you don't want to start then saying Mitch McConnell's, blocking it. You want a pre-existing narrative to exist.
But Sam, that would require playing offense in politics, which is completely foreign to Democrats. It's always prevent defense. Like that's.
I still think of it as defense. I mean, honestly, like. I still think of it that way. They're not the ones proposing. I mean, it's. I
agree with you, but that would be proactive politics. Is maybe a way to.
It would be doing politics,
right?
It would be doing something,
or it would just be politics. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you would be like actively trying. I mean, this is the thing: is that I think that what we learned in this election, it seems to me, right, is that bringing out more people is not necessarily the answer. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that. I think we should make voting. We should be bringing out. I don't know.
Maybe they'll stop
twice as many. I don't know if we can bring out twice as many voting, but we got to 68%. We should be bringing out another 25-30% of voters. That should happen, but that's not going to guarantee Democratic wins. What needs to happen is the Democrats not only need to provide material benefits for their base. They need to make Republicans' brand depress their own turnout, to dampen the enthusiasm of Republican voters. Put aside the putting out the material benefits, right? Like people were coming out to vote against Donald Trump. But what they did not do was make the Republican Party pay for Donald Trump. They got a free pass. It was just like, the Republican, people came out and they wanted to split tickets because they were like, I have no reason to not vote for Republicans.
Susan Collins, case study A. I mean, like the fact that Gideon was so well funded. I mean,
Ernst is even more of an example of that. It seems to me. Tom Tillis is a more example. Like I think
Lindsey Graham never had a shot of losing. That's
no, I get that, but with the amount of money raised, I mean, it was never. He was literally given a free pass by Dianne Feinstein, which is the reason she is stepping down from her leadership position because of the exact dynamic that Sam is talking about. The Democratic leadership and Joe Biden's campaign made zero. Biden's campaign did the opposite. They welcomed in Republicans to their
Nancy
campaign.
Pelosi did that too.
Totally.
Listen,
but
I can understand Joe Biden. Joe Biden saying my job number one is to get elected. So I'm going to say what I got to say to get elected. But the point is that this is not stuff that should happen 6 months out from election day in November. This should have been day number one, job number one for Nancy Pelosi when she became Speaker of the House. The whole strategy should have been, what are we going to do to bind Donald Trump, the least popular president in modern history, to the Republican Party? Everything that we do is going to highlight that. We're not going to get his taxes. We're not going to get officials to come in and testify us. I understand that. We need to turn the camera, and the camera's got to focus on every single one of those Republican lawmakers sitting in that committee. And every time they don't criticize somebody to come in to talk to them, that is going to undercut the Republican Party. That needed to be job number one, day number one. Not sending out message bills that are going to make, that theoretically, that are going to play any, it's got to be, our job is to make Republicans look bad.
But that's not her theory of change. Her theory of change is making sure that those swing district Democrats keep her majority. And if she goes after Republicans, that makes them more at risk of losing their seats, which they lost anyways.
Right. Her theory.
But their entire theory of change
stinks.
is exactly, but simultaneously, Joe Biden's theory of change, of course, is appealing to Republicans to win. But also, isn't it great that there's a Senate that gives him cover so that all these people that he's just, put on his transition team don't get ticked off at him? And so he can incrementally reform an already Band-Aid, I should say, a wound that is spilled. Like how many limbs are off of the American people at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that they spent a lot of money. If they were trying to lose those races, they were very, very clever about it. I just think that they're inept. I think they're just inept. Call them from a 417.
I'm not saying that they're intentionally, but they're not going to change their strategy.
Oh no, they need to die out.
Losing is kind of
usually you look back and you go, oh, maybe like when I got a shellacking, I should change my strategy, or maybe like again when I got a shellacking, or maybe again when I got a shellacking, I should change my strategy. Instead, they're just like, here we go again, one more time, Rahm Emanuel strategy.
Call from a 417 area code. Who's this? Where you calling from?
Hi, this is Gene from Springfield. How are you doing?
Gene, how are you?
I'm doing well. I just wanted to add something to the conversation you were having about foreign policy and the left in general.
Hey, will you back? Hold on, Gene. Will you back off your phone just a little bit?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, just even a little bit more. It's just a little bit. You're breaking up just a little bit. You're a little too hot.
How about here?
Yeah, as far away as you can get from whatever it is you're talking to, the better. And I can put you up.
Okay, here I am. Yep. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, yeah. I mean, the point I was going to make is, and I think Nomiki and yourself made this point actually just as just before I called this. We have a major problem with the issue of developing a left-wing foreign policy, something that fills the gap between liberal interventionism and go home Yankee. There isn't an institutional basis to come up with foreign policy. When we talk about things like Medicare for all or free college, we have concrete proposals to put forward about what an alternative vision for how America is organized under a more social democratic leadership. But when it comes to foreign policy, there just isn't any vision between the extreme of just anti-imperialism and completely withdrawing the United States from the world overnight, and this kind of liberal interventionism that sort of gained currency under Clinton and then later Obama, and which today is virtually indistinguishable from neoconservatism.
Yep.
So we have that vision problem, and at the same time we have very serious institutional problems. The way that the foreign policy establishment is staffed is extremely inbred. It's people from elite universities who do not get their positions based on merit, but are basically getting their position because of the connections they've made in these elite institutions. And this creates a very inbred, a sort of inbred elite that just can't think outside of the box. So, that was the kind of point that I wanted to make, that we need to really look at this, not only for the sake of sort of international affairs, but for development in the United States. The Iraq War was a disaster. Iraq was destroyed. I was there in 2004. I was there in 2014, and it was a mess. It was a mess all the way in that whole decade, which, that I've been visiting Iraq. Not much progress had been made in development. But, Iraq was destroyed, but the real looting that took place in the Iraq war was of the U.S. Treasury. And that has had a fundamental effect on the United States. The oil contracts in Iraq are going to Italian, Turkish companies. But the U.S. basically kicked open the treasury, and all this military-industrial complex stole the money.
Right.
So,
well, it's two-part. It seems to me what was achieved there. One, it's the Smedley Butler all war is racket is a racket type of situation. But the other part is that I think from the perspective of a Cheney, he would still say, 80% win. The bottom line is we just wanted to make sure that the Chinese did not have hegemony, and an ability to sort of get access to that oil, for the future conflict that we're going to have in 2040 when we're having to go to war with them. I mean, I honestly think that was their thinking. But let me just say this in terms of the lack of an institutional left foreign policy in this country. The closest thing that we come to any type of a national expression of a leftist foreign policy, it seems to me, was a speech that Bernie Sanders gave, I don't know, was it 3 years ago now or
yes,
I can't even remember.
Yeah.
And, Matt Duss was his one of his chief foreign policy advisor. He hired him very shortly after the 2016 election, if I remember correctly, because he wanted to build out.
Before, right?
He
Matt
wanted
Duss
to build out that part of his potential run, I guess, or just his what he was offering. And Duss and Fashkur, the campaign manager for Bernie Sanders, both came out, tweeted positive things about Blinken. I read that in one of two ways. One, that they had access to him in the transition, or over the years they've had access to him.
Or that they hope to have access?
Or that they hope to have access.
Right.
And I think that I'm not totally outsourcing my perspective on this to Duss, because it could very well be a question of he wants to have access. But I know that he wants to have access not because he wants to move up in foreign policy circles as much as he has a progressive agenda that he wants to be able to put into the mix. And so if he believes there's an opportunity for a progressive voice to sit at the table, I take that as a positive, or at the very least, that there's no other options, right? I think that I get the sense that Duss is, if he had a list, that Blinken would have been on that list. He may not have been at the top of that list, but there's an opportunity there. There's no doubt, and whether it's how Iraq was doing, 3 years ago, or maybe in 2012, Blinken didn't seem to have a clue. His perspective on Syria as to who we could give armaments to and where it would end up, I don't think he had a clue. And Yemen, his whole strategy in terms of Yemen, I mean, it's hard to know exactly whose strategy was what and, who's going along with it, but he certainly was associated with it. I think that was completely a mistake. The whole thing, we could do some type of constructive engagement with the Saudis. And if we do, this is going to be, increase our leverage with the Saudis and we're going to hold them back. I mean, it didn't work. But I think he's aware of it. And if he's soliciting at least a progressive or left agenda on foreign policy, I think that's a positive. And it may be as good as we can do in the absence, a complete absence, it seems to me, of a left foreign policy. I mean,
the closest we got to a left foreign policy, really, I would say, was just what Obama was running on in the 2008 election, which wasn't even really policy. It was just harnessing the anger towards the Iraq and Afghanistan war. But there was that opportunity there to galvanize upon populist anger towards those wars and the atrocities and the loss of life and the illegality, specifically of the Iraq war. but that didn't happen really. I feel like once we talk about the left going to sleep, when Obama got elected and continued to kind of push back the deadline of removing us from those conflicts, like all of that energy was sapped, and now it's kind of in this ether where we don't have the infrastructure and we don't have the push to do so. I mean, Bernie's emphasis on foreign policy was good, but I would not say it's central to the left.
No, of course not.
And what's not in the way it should be. Right.
And,
even the Matt
and
Duss
frankly,
thing, though,
the conversations that Gene and Michael had was one of like the few, you know, and a podcast should not be, you know, sort of like corner the market on this stuff. But like, there's very few places where there's like any type of like institutional or even like an arena where you hear some type of like progressive left foreign policy perspective.
Unless it's just about the threat of China, the threat of Russia, the threat of X, Y, and Z, right? Like there isn't actual, that's what dominates discussion in mainstream news about what we do.
I think the whole thing with Matt Duss, though, is we have to be really cautious about these things. Just because somebody tweets something does not mean it's necessarily a signal that they actually care about that person. There are multi-layers, like you said. It could mean that he wants access, but it also could mean that he's there to signal to the left that this guy's okay, or both, whether it's intuitive or strategic. I mean,
who is the other progressive left? Who is the other left foreign policy advisor?
Jim Zogby.
Who?
Jim Zogby.
Who is he served with in like, you know, as an advisor? Like where, like, I'm just saying,
Bill
like
Clinton, Barack Obama, shall I go on? Bernie Sanders is senior advisor. He was, the chair of the Sanders Institute, specifically focusing on foreign policy. I mean, there are plenty of people on the left who have been voices for change. It's just there's no concrete theory, and part of it is because I think of the dynamic, partly it's a newer space. Partly it's
how has Zogby reacted to the Blinken pick?
I actually haven't checked. I haven't looked up. I mean, this is, I'm sure he's posted something on Twitter. And he's independent. He's not sitting here trying to leverage himself for another job or, whatever. We're all human. I'm not like criticizing Duss, but that's just how people are, right? He doesn't, Zogby doesn't need, he's 70 something years old. He's not looking for his next gig.
Well, I'm not. I mean, it could be that Duss is looking for his next gig, but the point is that if he thinks that it's possible he could get one, I think that's encouraging, because there's a lot of people he would be completely locked out from.
100%. But there's no sense that he can pressure him, and there's also like if we're putting all of our eggs in that basket, we've got some real serious issues here as a movement.
I would not disagree that we have some very serious issues. I mean, Joe Biden won, so like there is a part of me that I totally agree with you and Nomiki in terms of just like rhetorically what we want to push for. But I guess the fact that I'm resigned to it is more just. I think the Biden camp is trying to toe a line, but that they're not going to specifically give life or too much life to the left. And I think that's strategic in and of itself. At the same time, I don't think the left has leverage right now. I think it hasn't been used effectively. And I think there's going to be a recalibration in 2022. There just has to be outside pressure in terms of, like the best leverage that the left has are vocal leaders in Congress like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who can use their bully pulpit and their online platform to critique the Biden administration. But outside of that, I don't know.
One point that I'd just like to sort of conclude on, so I don't take too much of your time, is simply, I think Nomiki spoke to it, is the lack of vision. So if we do get people with leverage, what is the objective? So if our objective is to disband the empire, inverted commas, how do we actually achieve that within the existing system? How do you get a proof of concept? Can you just pull out of East Asia overnight? I mean, we have to start thinking about concrete, detailed ways where we can actually do things. For example, pulling out of Europe, although there would be enormous hostility amongst the democratic establishment, would make total sense as a place to get, as a first place to remove American military forces from. The same issue with Afghanistan. America has not been militarily defeated in Afghanistan, but after 20 years, sometimes you just have to give up the ghost, and it's been a political defeat, and it's just going to go on and on and on. So there has to be some kind of concrete plan. How, if, for example, you have President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 10, 15 years' time, how is she going to both start dismantling the American empire and at the same time maintaining some kind of legitimacy and support and momentum behind that progress, and not sort of provoking a backlash that will halt the progress? And I just think we as people on the left just haven't really thought about that, because it's very easy to get into the Yankee go home kind of mentality. And Nomiki spoke to it earlier. You had people, you have people who react against American imperialism and end up lauding Colonel Gaddafi or Assad or Saddam Hussein, who are, people not worth lauding. So I think we really need to concretely think about this, not just because of, the deleterious effect of the American empire overseas, but also the effect it has on American internal politics.
And the effect it has on other, hegemonically, yes, it could empower China, and yes, it could empower a Putin. Forget about Russia, forget about, whatever romantic theories you have of Stalin in Russia. It's specifically, when we do pull out of regions like Turkey, for instance, what does that create a gap for? What is that? How does that empower Turkey? How does that empower Turkey in its pressure against Armenia? And what is Armenia really about? Is it about Iran? We have to really think about these things from a complicated perspective of when you pull out, what kind of vacuum is created, and how does that affect interests, even other countries that we that do not have the military power. So if we don't want further conflict, we have to think about what are the consequences of us pulling out and other forces coming in who don't necessarily care about the humanistic aspects of Armenia, for instance. Right. So,
but the United States has had a presence in Turkey since the end of the Second World War. They had nuclear weapons there, and it still hasn't done anything to stop Turkey's aggression against Greece, against Rojava, and now in Armenia. So how is that leverage being used? It strikes me, for example, with the specific case of Turkey, the United States is actually providing cover for Turkey's increasingly aggressive behavior in the Eastern Mediterranean and other places, precisely because it's inside that American system, and it has that advantage that Iran doesn't have. When we conceptualize a new Middle East policy, we definitely need to move away from a policy that favors certain nations over others in terms of their aggressive expansionist aims, whether it's Iran, Saudi Arabia, or Turkey.
All right, Gene, appreciate the call. We'll have you on to talk about this, I think, a little bit more in depth, so we can have some room, but I appreciate thanks for calling in. Folks, we're not going to have time for many more calls at all. Apologies. Let's go to the IM for a bit. Then we got to wrap up. We got to get out of here. Train boy, Cuomo losing his veto pen. Oh, we didn't even talk about this, Nomi. Losing his veto pen is amazing news for New York. Some of the things he's vetoed include making it illegal to lock a child under 10 alone in a sealed car, making free menstrual products available at charter schools, and the creation of a statewide consumer advocate position. On another note, does Sunset Lake know you're advertising for another mail order tree company?
This is just, let me just say quickly, because we've talked about this on the show recently about why a Charles Booker candidacy would have been better in terms of setting up an infrastructure in Kentucky for Democrats to build on, and why, harnessing some of that populist energy would have worked. Like, Cynthia Nixon's run was key in setting up the situation that we're in now, which was a huge goal to basically neuter the IDC, get rid of it, and get rid of Cuomo's excuse to kind of run down the center and nix progressive policy priorities. And that was set up because of grassroots activism, in part by Cynthia Nixon's run for governor. And so that's what progressive campaigns can do.
I will
even if
give
they
a little
don't
bit
win.
more credit to some of the so in the So yeah, Cynthia Nixon definitely pulled a ton of energy away from Governor Cuomo, who could have protected the IDC, but I don't really think there's any evidence of him protecting his allies ever, and most politicians don't do that. But Cynthia Nixon did distract him. She made him spend a lot of money, and that is all very important, right?
She also made it a big part. I mean, she educated people to the IDC too. That was a big part of it.
100%. But we have to keep in mind here, when you say grassroots activists, Senator Gianaris, who's, by the way, his interview is, I think, on our show this week. So if you want to check it out, he's the deputy leader of the Senate who orchestrated the anti-IDC. He was the architect behind the scenes. Later, they wrote about him doing it. But he came up to me, he's my senator, right after Trump was elected, and said, I don't understand the left. How can we educate folks on the IDC? And Emma, you know this. We were doing at TYT, fighting with editors at TYT about whether or not we should cover the IDC, and it's too wonky. But it educated folks, and those folks showed up, the TYT viewers, the Majority Report viewers, showed up and volunteered. Were all these IDC challengers that were recruited by Senator Gianaris, right? And he went out there and interviewed them all. And so those IDC challengers had grassroots groups before the big grassroots groups came in for months, almost a year in several cases, of activists that decided to start their own groups like No IDC, these little local things. And that helped them win back, basically dismantle the IDC because they didn't have enough seats to keep it in existence. So I give a lot of credit to Cynthia Nixon, but I also give a ton of credit to the strategy. There was an extremely orchestrated, thoughtful strategy around it. And at the end of the day, all politics is local. Did she educate the mass public about the IDC? Without a doubt. Did she recruit more energy? Absolutely. But, Alessandra Biaggi deserves the credit that she organized in her community, and Jessica Ramos organized in their community. And by the way, they didn't run as a ticket. So that's something a lot of folks don't even recognize, because having Cynthia Nixon endorse Alessandra Biaggi could have been a detriment to her in her district of Westchester. Right. So it was a very thoughtful strategy, but I will caution one thing, and Senator Gianaris, who's the deputy leader of the Senate now, says this in our interview. He said, it just because it's veto-proof doesn't mean there are going to be a few Democratic senators who, once again, create they won't necessarily be IDC members, but they'll be like the Joe Mancins.
Yes,
they're in Long Island, they're upstate. Don't forget, there's a ton of real estate money, both in the Assembly and in the Senate. There's a ton of charter school money that's being taken in both, and police money. And so there's still going to be this dynamic. It's not like it's going to be easy. There's
always going to be those politicians who are going to put themselves at the fulcrum, and they want to be the final 5 votes. I want to be one of those people because I get all the attention at that point.
And they call them the KKK, by the way. This is the best. There's 3K. Actually, I think one of them was voted out, but I have to look at it again.
Well, and so, this is stuff, but with that said, there's going to be increasing pressure on those people and scrutiny on those people. And there's an opportunity for New York to be a leader in the country for progressive policy now. And that's where it should be. I mean, I think, this stuff, I think, builds on itself. And so we'll see.
And one thing on that, just real quick. So the city is the city is falling apart, right? New York City, right? There's just going to be mass eviction crisis. And there's a real movement in the Senate right now by DSA members and other Democrats to take on real estate. That's something that was just a no, you don't touch it, right? You don't touch real estate. And then also the police union. The police union is now attacking state lawmakers. Yes. And state lawmakers have the ability, because they're not part of this city system, the city council, mayor system, where they're beholden to the police union. And it's kind of amazing to see that the pressure is actually going to be coming from the state, not from the progressives in the city. So I think it's just interesting how all these things play together. And to Emma's point, you're right, Cynthia Nixon's energy, it kind of created this cover and mass education for folks to understand the power that real estate, police, and charter schools have over the state.
And and then in many respects, Zephyr Teach Out sort of softened up the ground so that Nixon could run. I mean, if Zephyr Teach Out doesn't run in, I can't remember what it was, 2014, 2012, if she doesn't run, then Cynthia Nixon doesn't run 4 years later.
Right.
Emma Fig Newtonland. QAnon and other conspiracy theories are consuming people and ruining their lives. It's really disturbing to see. What does the society do to address this? Also, Sam, play some 7 Days to Die of stream. I don't know what society does.
What's
that? What does society do with a QAnon growth? We're going to find out. I'll tell you that. Why do Q supporters complain about a fraudulent election, says Dave Rubin, Dating Profile. By their beliefs, the first election was fraudulent because it was put in there by military intelligence. It's really inconsistent. Yes, well, comrade questions. MR audience should check out the podcast Behind the Bastards with Reverend Dr. Robert Evans. Put out an episode about Dave Rubin this morning that had some really great information. Also draw some more attention to the damage grifters such as Dave can do. Happy Thanksgiving, Samantha and MR crew. Behind the Bastards.
Oh, yeah.
He's the guy that's done all that good reporting in Portland. I'm a bit concerned that he's moved into podcasting now.
Oh, that's
check that out.
Yeah, I read a lot of his tweets. ND Nurse in North Dakota, and our governor has been able to hide our COVID crisis for far too long. Healthcare in a rural state is a little different with our network of critical access hospitals that mainly provide stabilizing treatment for anyone who's really sick and then transfer patients to a few larger hospitals. These larger hospitals quickly fill up with all the sickest patients in the state. Critical access hospitals sit empty. So he was able to talk about how many open beds we had statewide for a long time, but those beds are nearly useless for anyone very sick. Many don't even have ventilators or staff trained for long-term care. They don't have specialists like cardiologists or neurologists, just a skeleton crew of staff talented at saving lives. Big hospitals have been overwhelmed for a long time. The governor knew this, but didn't care that they were drowning. You know, that's the thing is that, like I say, you can set up a tent. You can put beds in there. You can go into, the Civic Center and put beds in there. But if you don't have nurses and you don't have doctors, you've got a real problem.
Yeah, that was a story in North Dakota. They were reporting total beds, but ones that weren't staffed until it came down to like, oh, we've only got 12 left. So when we were saying 115, we've got 12 in the entire state.
Anarcho PMC, your point about the possibility of breaking up the tech giants doesn't seem like the Dems could leverage the GOP's critique to actually make that happen. Right. I think so. I mean, that seems to me to be the way. It's like where you take all of this, like sort of like, this existing now conservative, and it won't last long because they could change their orientation very quickly. But you take this, but what they're going to do is they're going to go after 230. And in my mind, I'm less concerned about Section 230 and more concerned about the size of these things. I think you cut them up. I think you carve them up and you allow competition to exist. And so that you get like Parler, Twitter, and this and that. And so that you don't have this problem of that these are utilities in the same way. And because I just don't think there is a way. You either will silence all speech or you will have the problem of the government trying to do it, which I think is highly problematic. I don't want any big entity to silence this speech. And the problem with that, however, is that like you can get enormous amount of money. And if there's just one place for everybody to go to get their information or 3 places, it's a real problem. But if there's 30.
Quick question on that. A lot of these like tech companies, like the apps, for instance, the communications apps, there's not one centralized, like safe communication app, like Signal, all the ones that people use, Telegraph, whatever. A lot of them are owned by different like foreign interests or investors, I should say, from those countries. I mean, is there a fear alternatively that like, if there isn't some sort of concentrated, monopolistic power with these tech companies, that there's more of an opportunity for data and important information to be, taken hold of by foreign...
like actual, like secured, like encrypted.
Yeah, secured, like actual.
I mean,
or just data on tunnel. I mean, like there's tons of it. TikTok's the perfect example. The big, but
I mean, data, it's all being hoovered up anyways.
Yeah,
all that data is already being hoovered up.
Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, what's the difference? You don't think they'll sell it to a government? They're in the business.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying if you're I agree with you. I'm saying the concentration of power, and there's overlap. You see it on the transition team that the people are revolving door from Uber and the CIA. Like
I think the concentration of power makes it easier for the things that you're talking about to happen, because there's one place. They just got to make one deal, right? Like, I mean, and my feeling is it's like this. When I first got into radio, there was a move by Louise Slaughter, who is a great congresswoman from upstate. I can't remember exactly what her district was.
It was Rochester.
And she was trying to get the fairness doctrine reinstated. No radio hosts would support her because it would, in many respects, ruin our business model at the time. Now, my perspective was like, I totally support this. I would love to drive this business out of business. I was psyched. I went down to Washington. I, had a press conference with her talking about how we need to have the fairness doctrine back in, even though it's going to destroy, maybe left-wing talk radio, because you can't combine right-wing and talk right-wing and left-wing talk radio. It's not profitable, they would say. Now, maybe it wouldn't be, maybe it would be. I don't give a shit. The point is, like, there are some things that are detrimental to society, and the way you weed those out, you just make them less profitable. And so if people really want to do it, they'll do it. And if they don't want to do it, they won't do it. But the way that you deal with these things is you make these companies less profitable. You basically say, you can't have that business model. It's just not good for society. And so you cannot hoover up these companies. You cannot hoover up, the data from them. You cannot engage in this business and that business at the same time, because you're basically self-dealing and you're corralling people. We had it in this country for a long time with the Sinn Fin laws. You could not own a movie theater and a movie studio because that was bad for film. It was bad for competitors. You couldn't have many movie theaters, and and consumers wouldn't get a choice.
Sam, why are you anti-synergy?
That's exactly it. I want less synergy. All right, 5 more of these things, then we get to get out of here. Sorry, folks. Volume 2 Capital. Sam, after you left Thursday, the crew got a call from a U.S. Navy veteran of Second Iraq War who had a sharp analysis of your recent debate with Paul Rieckhoff. Speaking of which, have you checked on Paul since Monday's appearance? He seemed very upset at the recent news that U.S. troops might possibly leave Afghanistan after 19 years of occupation. He's insisting they stay longer for certain reasons. Those reasons are never clearly given, of course. You're certainly correct in pointing out that U.S. service members and veterans can hold a wide range of political views and that many lean progressive. I've met Iraq War veterans who have become strongly anti-imperialist and full-blown socialists, especially among the non-officer class. Obviously, First Lieutenant Paul Rieckhoff is not among those types of veterans, but what is more, the man appears to have never seen an American military venture he doesn't support or defend. It's curious perspective from someone who quit his job on Wall Street in 2002. So he could join the army as a lieutenant to invade Iraq. I'm not sure if that's a question. South Dakota Progressive. Sam, your phone system doesn't seem to be running. That was a long time ago. Vaping Goldfish. Can I get Nomi's tape on the skim? Next, check out her show in 10 minutes. She'll give you.
Wait, what was it? Hang on.
The newsletter, The Skim.
Oh, The Skim.
Yeah.
Dr. Chaos MD, in regards to Libya, it would also be mentioned that Gaddafi also wanted to create more of an EU-style coalition in Africa with its own sovereign currency and ditch the dollar, right? I don't know.
Yeah, there's nuance, guys. Yes, he did propose that, but he also wanted to be the self-anointed leader of it with no democratic system internally.
Sam's unclean. David Dayen just announced BRIAMDs. Yes, we knew that. And the final I am of the day. Georgia Bree, my libertarian sister in Georgia, says she will vote for anyone in the runoff who will cancel her student loan debt. Good for her. Folks, check out Nomi's show right after this. Emma, Brendan, Matt, Nomi, good job today. Folks, this is going to be the last live show until next Monday. We're going to pre-record tomorrow's show in a short amount of time. So have a safe Thanksgiving. Stay healthy. Stay safe. We'll see you on Monday, but tune in tomorrow. You're going to enjoy that show too. Bye.
Bye, take care.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught.